I moved into this apartment 4 weeks ago, and I still remember the first time I walked in. The hallway was empty except for a tall mirror on the right side. It was so big that it took up almost the entire wall. The realtor never mentioned it, and I barely noticed it when we signed the lease. But everything about my life here changed because of that mirror. I'm telling you this now because I need to get it off my chest. I feel like my mind is bending under the weight of what I've seen. I can't sleep well, and I keep checking over my shoulder. Even in the shower, I swear I hear something moving in the hallway. I'm always on edge. I work a regular job at a small marketing firm. My life is straightforward. I come home around 6, eat dinner, watch some TV, and go to bed. I usually ignore whatever odd quirks old buildings have. Creaking floors, flickering lights, weird smells. Those things are normal in older places. But on my second day here, I noticed something off about that mirror. When I say it's big, I mean it's almost 7 feet tall and about 3 feet wide. The frame is dark, maybe mahogany, with some carvings that are chipped in a few places. At first, I didn't really examine it. I just walked by on my way in or out. But I started seeing strange spots on the surface. They looked like watermarks or smudges at first, so I tried cleaning them. I grabbed some glass cleaner one evening and gave it a good wipe. The cloth came away dirty, but the spots never completely left. They almost looked like faint outlines, but I couldn't tell if I was imagining that. A few days later, after a long day at work, I went to take a shower. I remember the shower water was lukewarm because the building's boiler can't handle all the tenants using hot water at once. Anyway, I got out feeling cold and annoyed. As I walked into the hallway, I glanced at the mirror. My reflection was blurry because I was still dripping water. Then I saw these shapes in the corner of the mirror. At first, I thought it was fog or steam from the bathroom, but the silhouettes were too defined to be random. They looked like the outlines of shoulders and heads, but only in the lower corners of the glass. I stood there confused, wrapped in my towel. I leaned in and touched the mirror's surface. It wasn't hot and there was no obvious steam on it. I wiped my hand across the lower corner, and for a second I thought I felt something move. But it was probably just my hand slipping on the slick surface. The silhouettes disappeared when I touched the glass, so I figured I was just paranoid or seeing some reflection from the hallway light. I shook it off. That night, I lay in bed thinking about the silhouettes. I tried to push it aside, telling myself it was some weird optical illusion. But the next morning, I walked by the mirror before leaving for work. I saw faint stains again in the exact same spot. I didn't have time to mess with it, so I just hurried out the door, already running late. During the next few days, I kept catching glimpses of those shapes in the mirror, always when I wasn't looking straight at it. It felt like something was moving inside the reflection, but whenever I turned my head, it was just me or my hallway. I started feeling uneasy around that area. I'd walk around it quickly, barely glancing at it. One evening, I decided I had to do something. I grabbed a blanket and draped it over the mirror so I wouldn't have to see those stains. I told myself it was just temporary. Maybe the spots were a trick of the light, and I needed a break from it. It made me feel better for a short while, but as I was making dinner that night, I kept feeling this strange sensation. It was like the hallway was alive somehow. I'd crane my neck, expecting to see something pop out, but the hallway was empty except for that covered mirror. When I tried to sleep that night, I heard subtle tapping sounds coming from the hallway. It was faint, so at first I thought it was just the building settling. But it kept happening about every 5 minutes, like someone tapping a finger on a wooden surface. Tap, tap, tap. Then silence. I got up, turned on the hallway light, and checked around. Nothing was out of place. The blanket was still over the mirror. I stood there for a moment, breathing heavily, and then I realized I was sweating even though the apartment was cool. I went back to bed, telling myself it was all in my head. The next morning, I decided to uncover the mirror. For some reason, I felt like the blanket made things worse, like it was provoking whatever weird energy was in the apartment. When I pulled the blanket off, I noticed that the stains had spread. They looked darker and bigger, almost like smudged handprints, but more elongated. I felt my chest tighten. There were no kids or guests around, so it made no sense. My own hands definitely didn't leave that kind of mark. I turned away, swallowing hard, and tried to focus on getting to work on time. At the office that day, I couldn't concentrate. Every time I blinked, I saw those shapes in my mind. I told a friend about it, and he joked about haunted mirrors. I laughed it off, but I felt a chill in my spine. That evening, instead of going straight home, I went to a local library to do some research. It was a last-minute idea, but I was desperate to distract myself. I asked the librarian if there were any local legends about old mirrors or properties around my street. She gave me a confused look, but directed me to a small local history section. I skimmed through a few books and stumbled on a newspaper clipping from the 1980s. It mentioned a family who claimed their large mirror showed faces at night. The family ended up moving, convinced something was inside that mirror. The article didn't give a clear address, but it mentioned a large apartment building in my neighborhood. That was enough to make my stomach churn. I quickly photocopied the page and left. Back in my apartment, I set the clipping on the coffee table and took a look at the mirror. The stains seemed even bigger now. This time there were definitely shapes that looked like shoulders, arms, and even elongated fingers. I held my breath and stared. They didn't move at first, but then I blinked, and for half a second I saw them shift. It was just a slight change, like one of them raising an arm. My heart started racing. I backed away, keeping my eyes locked on the glass. When I reached my bedroom door, I turned and slammed it shut, feeling my legs shake. I sat on my bed, trying to calm down. I told myself that if I just stayed away from the mirror, nothing bad would happen. But the memory of that slight movement wouldn't leave me. My rational side told me it was stress or a play of the light. My gut told me something else was going on. That night I tried to drown out the tapping with some music. I put on headphones and sat in bed, reading random articles on my phone. Every so often I'd lift one side of the headphones to listen. I still heard faint clicking noises, almost like nails tapping on glass. I felt panic building in my chest. I had to do something. I decided to pull out my phone and record a video of the hallway. Maybe if I had actual footage, I could prove to myself that it was all in my head, or that there really was something happening. I turned on my phone's camera and pointed it toward the mirror from my bedroom door. I stayed quiet and tried to keep my hand steady. I recorded for about 3 minutes, then stopped. My heart pounded as I played it back. At first, everything looked normal. Then about halfway through, I saw a small flicker of movement in the corner of the mirror, right where those silhouettes were. It was brief, like a hand or something similar sliding along the edge. I dropped my phone, cursing under my breath. My entire body broke out in goosebumps. I grabbed the phone again and watched that section a few more times. It was there. It was subtle, but it was there. I felt a wave of dread. I went to the living room and paced around, thinking about what to do. Calling the landlord seemed pointless. Who would believe me? I thought about getting rid of the mirror, but it was attached to the wall in a way that looked complicated. Also, I remembered reading something about previous owners of old mirrors who said that throwing them out made matters worse. I didn't want to risk it without a plan. The next day, I looked for more information. I found a forum online where people discussed haunted objects. Most posts sounded fake, but one person mentioned that covering a mirror sometimes intensifies the activity because it forces the presence to try other ways to make contact. Another user wrote that confronting the mirror was key, but they didn't explain how. None of it felt like real advice. I started wondering if I should just leave, break my lease, and move out. But I wasn't ready to throw away my security deposit and the hassle of moving again. That evening, I stood in front of the mirror with the overhead light on. The stains were now forming 2 distinct silhouettes, each about the size of an adult. I inhaled slowly, then spoke out loud. I said, "I don't know what you are, but leave me alone." My voice sounded shaky, and I felt ridiculous talking to my own reflection. Nothing happened immediately. Then in the reflection, I saw something shift. It wasn't a reflection of me because I stayed perfectly still. It was one of those silhouettes moving its arm in a slow, stiff motion, almost like it was waving. My vision blurred for a second. My muscles tensed. I stumbled backward, nearly falling. I grabbed the nearest chair and leaned on it, trying to steady my breathing. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I forced myself to look at the mirror again. The stains were still there, but now they looked like they had changed position. It was impossible for them to move on their own, yet they did. I felt a wave of nausea. I called a friend and asked if I could stay at his place for the night, but he was out of town. I didn't have many options, so I ended up staying in my own bedroom. I locked the door, even though that made no sense because the door didn't block the mirror's influence, if that was even a thing. The tapping started up again, more persistent than before. It sounded like a slow rhythm. Tap, tap, tap. Pause, then tap, tap. My spine tingled every time I heard it. I barely slept. I kept imagining those silhouettes stepping out of the mirror and walking into my apartment. Several times I almost got up to tear the mirror off the wall, but fear held me back. By morning, my eyes burned, and my shoulders were stiff from tension. I had to go to work, so I dragged myself out, but I kept looking down the hallway, half expecting to see something standing there. The mirror was empty from that angle, so I left in a hurry. At work, I asked around discreetly about mirrors. I even hinted about my situation to a coworker who's into weird stuff. He suggested I look up the previous tenants of my apartment. That's when I realized I never asked the landlord about who lived there before me. So that afternoon, I went down to the management office. I pretended I was curious about the building's history. The manager, an older guy, told me that the mirror had been there for decades. He said that some previous renters asked if it could be removed, but it was too heavy and apparently original to the building. I asked if they ever complained about anything weird. He gave me a strange look and shrugged, saying people always complain about weird stuff when they live alone. Then he said, "But yeah, a few folks said they saw something in that mirror. We just told them to ignore it." That comment made my stomach lurch. I left the office feeling tense and clammy. I came home that evening determined to figure this out. I stood in front of the mirror for a long time watching those stains. They seemed darker, like shadowy figures. They moved more freely, shifting when I blinked or glanced away. Sometimes I thought I saw them turning toward each other as if communicating. I broke into a cold sweat, but I forced myself to watch. After a while, my nerves were shot. I grabbed my phone to record another video. I wanted to document a few minutes of the mirror, hoping to catch more evidence. When I played it back, I saw the stains shift again in the same slow, unsettling way. One shape raised an arm, then the other mirrored the motion. They looked like they were gesturing at me. My breathing got shallow and I stopped the video. I felt dizzy. I'm writing this now and I can still hear the tapping in the hallway. I pulled the blanket over the mirror again because I can't stand to see those shapes move. But I swear the tapping is even louder tonight. My back is damp with sweat and every hair on my arms is standing up. It's like they're calling for me, trying to get my attention. I don't know what will happen next. I can't think straight. My plan is to leave the apartment for a few days if I can find a place to crash. I don't want to deal with this anymore. I wish I had never moved here. But part of me worries that even if I leave, I'll still feel them watching me. Right now, I'm just a guy sitting on a couch, writing down what's happening, hoping that this isn't the start of something worse. My heart feels like it's racing 100 miles an hour, and my palms are clammy as I type. I'm going to sleep with the lights on tonight. Maybe that will help. If I make it through without losing my mind, I might call a specialist or someone who deals with haunted objects. But I don't even know if that's real. All I can say is that this mirror isn't normal. The stains are growing and those silhouettes want my attention. I can feel it every second I'm in this place. I wish I had an easy fix, but right now all I can do is try to get some rest and hope that in the morning, the shapes don't come any closer. I'm not sure how much more I can handle. I keep looking at the door, half expecting them to push their way through. For now, I'm just waiting, listening to that relentless tapping, praying that it stops. But it hasn't yet, and I don't know if it ever will. I can't say exactly when the knocking started, but I remember the first night I heard it, because I shot up in bed with my heart pounding so hard it hurt. It was the middle of the night. maybe 3 in the morning. I thought at first I might have imagined it. But then the soft, precise tapping came again. It sounded like someone's knuckles gently rapping on the wood of my front door. It wasn't loud or frantic, but it was steady enough to grab my complete attention. I stared at the dark ceiling for what felt like a long time. I was too afraid to move and my chest felt tight. When I heard the tapping a third time, I realized I was fully awake, and this wasn't a dream. I pushed off my blankets and stood. My knees felt shaky and my palms were sweaty. I walked across the living room. Everything in there was dark, except for the street lamp glow that crept in through the edges of the curtains. I stood in front of the door, holding my breath, listening for any clue of who or what was outside. That's when I did something I normally wouldn't do. I looked through the peephole. I almost expected to see a face staring back at me, but there was nothing. No one. The hallway was empty and still. I waited a few more seconds, then turned around and went back to bed. I couldn't sleep, though. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined footsteps shuffling just beyond the door. Eventually, maybe around 5, I fell asleep from sheer exhaustion. When the sun came up, I tried to shrug it off, deciding it had been a weird prank or some random noise I'd misinterpreted. But that entire day, I had a gnawing feeling in my gut. I couldn't ignore the fact that it felt real. I also couldn't forget how strongly I felt that presence, almost like someone was right on the other side of the door, staring straight at me. The second night, it happened again around the same time. I snapped awake instantly, my eyes darting around my bedroom, trying to figure out if I had heard something or if I was half dreaming. Then I heard it. Soft tapping, steady and patient. It wasn't forceful. It was calm, like someone asking to be let in without wanting to disturb anyone else. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. My heart hammered against my chest. I got up, grabbed the baseball bat I keep by my bed, and quietly made my way to the door. I stood there for about a minute, but the knocking stopped. It was like whoever or whatever was on the other side knew I was close. I pressed my ear against the wood. I heard nothing, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was standing there just inches away facing me. I swallowed hard and inched my eye toward the peephole again. Same result. Empty hallway. My gut told me I wasn't alone, though. It was quiet, but it was the kind of quiet that seems unnatural. No creaks, no rustling, no hum of distant traffic, just silence. I stayed put for a while, still clutching the bat. Eventually, I walked back to my bedroom, but I didn't sleep that night. By the third night, I was on edge even before I went to bed. I decided to stay up in the living room with the lights off, a blanket over my lap, just watching the door. I tried to watch TV to distract myself, but I kept muting it at every little noise. Around 2:45 a.m., I almost dozed off, and then I heard the tapping again. My chest tightened, and I felt every muscle in my body tense up. It was so quiet and deliberate. I sat there, my mouth dry, waiting to see if it would continue. After the fourth tap, I forced myself to look through the peephole. Nothing. But the tapping carried on. That was when I decided to speak. "Who's there?" My voice came out shaky. No response. I repeated myself, louder. Nothing. The tapping stopped for a few seconds, then resumed. I nearly dropped my phone because my hands were slick with sweat. I dialed the local non-emergency police line, feeling silly and paranoid, but also too freaked out to just ignore it. By the time an officer arrived, the knocking had stopped and there was no one in sight. The officer was polite but shrugged it off as either a prank or some noise in the building. I thanked him, but I felt no relief. The next day, I decided to install a couple of cheap cameras, one facing my front door from the inside and one in the hallway, pointing at my door. I live in an older apartment building that hasn't updated its security in a long time, so no one really complained about me sticking a small camera in the hallway. That night, I made sure the cameras were recording before I tried to sleep. Still, I couldn't fully relax. Even though I was exhausted, I stayed awake, listening. My clock ticked past 3 in the morning. I felt my eyelids drooping. I had just started to drift off when the tapping began. I jumped up and flicked on my phone to check the camera feeds. The inside camera showed the doorknob trembling slightly, as though someone was holding it from the other side. I froze. My breath got caught in my throat. I switched to the hallway camera. That camera's feed showed the empty corridor. No one was there. But the doorknob on the inside camera kept moving. It looked like it was being twisted gently and slowly, but with some force behind it. Then I heard a faint click, and the door cracked open a tiny bit. My stomach felt like it dropped to my feet. I scrambled to the door and pressed my shoulder against it. It slammed shut under my weight, and then I turned the lock and chain, my hands shaking so bad I could barely get it secured. I stayed there, leaning against the door. My heart was racing, and my mind kept replaying the image of that doorknob turning by itself. After a few minutes, the tapping came back, this time more insistent. I shouted, "Leave me alone." My throat felt tight, and my voice cracked. The tapping stopped, but a new sound replaced it. A faint whisper. It was muffled, but I was sure I heard my own name. It was repeated over and over, like a recording. Then everything went quiet. The next morning, I watched the footage again. Sure enough, the hallway camera showed absolutely nothing, while the inside camera showed the doorknob turning and the door pushing open slightly. It was eerie to see it in broad daylight, with no logical explanation. I felt goosebumps on my arms. I saved the footage on a hard drive just in case. The rest of the day I couldn't stop feeling on edge. I left the apartment for a while thinking maybe I just needed to get out. I went for a long walk, grabbed some groceries, and tried to pretend everything was normal. But in the back of my mind, I knew the night would come again, and I dreaded it. That evening, I set up the cameras again. I also barricaded the door with a chair under the knob, plus a heavy table pushed up against it. I felt a bit silly, but I'd rather feel silly than helpless. I sat down on my couch and tried to watch a movie. The volume was low. I couldn't focus on the plot, though. My attention was fully on the door. Minutes felt like hours. By the time midnight rolled around, I was sweating even though the apartment wasn't hot. I kept taking deep breaths, telling myself to stay calm. Around 3 a.m., the tapping returned. It started softly at first. 3 taps, then a pause, then 3 more taps. I stared at the door from my spot on the couch. I thought about ignoring it, but the tension was unbearable. My heart was pounding, and I felt a sick churn in my stomach. Then the tapping got a bit louder and faster. I grabbed my phone and opened the camera feed. The same thing was happening again. The doorknob on the inside was twisting, but nothing showed up on the hallway feed. The chair under the knob shifted slightly, creaking against the wood. I ran over and held the chair in place, pressing my body against it. My breath came in shaky bursts. Then I heard a whisper again. It was like a soft hiss, and I heard my name. The voice sounded close, almost right in my ear. It made my scalp prickle. I stayed like that for at least half an hour, just leaning against the chair and the door, waiting for the tapping and whispers to stop. Eventually they did. When I finally let go, my shirt was damp with sweat and my arms felt numb. I checked the inside camera footage the next day, and it showed the doorknob moving violently at certain points, like someone was really trying to force it open. Then, out of nowhere, it stopped. The hallway camera was as empty as always. This pattern continued for several nights. I was losing sleep, and I felt like I was walking around with a permanent knot in my gut. I started skipping work, telling my boss I was sick. Every night I prepared for that tapping, and it always came. Sometimes right at 3, sometimes a bit later, but never failing to appear. I tried contacting a couple of friends, but they all live far away or are too busy with their own lives. I didn't want to invite anyone here anyway. I didn't want them caught up in whatever was going on. I considered going to a motel, but deep down, I was afraid I would come back to find my door wide open. Or worse, something else inside. A few nights in, I started noticing that after the taps and the attempts to turn the knob, I would hear voices. Sometimes it was just a single voice whispering my name. Other times it sounded like more than one person, but always muffled and indistinct. I tried to record these sounds on my phone, but the playback never caught anything except faint static. The feeling of being watched grew stronger, When I walked around my apartment during the day, I sensed eyes on me. I kept glancing at the windows, making sure no one was looking in, but nothing was ever there. At one point, I thought about leaving for good. I had a wild idea of packing my things and moving out in the middle of the night, but the financial realities hit me. I can't afford to break my lease and move somewhere else right now. Plus, there's a stubborn part of me that wants to stand my ground. It's my place, after all. So I tried to fortify my door even more. I bought additional locks, installed a new deadbolt, and even stacked boxes against the door. It made me feel a little safer, but not much. The following night, the tapping returned right on schedule. I was sitting in the hallway on my side of the door, my back pressed against it, hoping my own body weight would help keep it shut. I had the lights off, and I was holding my phone, watching the camera feed in real time. I saw the knob twisting again, gently at first, then forcefully. The chain rattled. The new deadbolt made a clicking sound as it held firm. My heart was pounding so loudly I could hear my pulse in my ears. A moment later, I felt a slight push against my back, like a gentle shove from the other side. I almost screamed but bit down on my lip. My eyes welled up with tears from the sheer panic. Then the whispers started. They were so close that it felt like someone was on my side of the door, speaking into my ear. I heard my name repeated several times. My entire body was shaking. I tasted copper in my mouth, probably from biting my lip too hard. I stayed against that door for what felt like an eternity, until the pressure stopped and the voices died down into silence again. When dawn came, I tried to rest, but I couldn't keep my eyes shut for more than a few minutes. Every noise made me jump. I was exhausted, but the adrenaline in my system wouldn't let me relax. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror and barely recognized the face staring back. I had dark circles under my eyes and my hands trembled every time I tried to hold something steady. I kept hoping this would all just stop, but each night followed the same script. Tap, tap, tap. Then the knob turning, then the door pushing in. Sometimes more whispers, sometimes less. But always some sign that something was out there, focused on me, trying to get in. I considered calling the police again, but without concrete evidence of an intruder, they wouldn't do much. The camera footage was weird, sure, but it didn't show any actual person, and I couldn't prove anything else. Eventually, I started sleeping in short bursts during the day because nighttime became impossible. I set up the cameras again and again, always reviewing the footage, always seeing the same phenomenon. The hallway was empty, the doorknob moved, the door shook. I put fresh batteries in the hallway camera and checked to make sure it was working properly. Nothing changed. Now, I'm at a point where I spend most nights sitting on the floor, propped against the door, with my phone in hand. That's how I'm writing this. The tapping started about 10 minutes ago, right on schedule. My shoulders are rigid, and my stomach is in knots. Every time I feel the knob jiggling behind me, I brace myself. My skin crawls when I hear the faint rasp of my name through the wood. My breathing is shallow and my heart won't stop racing. I've tried talking to it, demanding it leave. I've tried asking what it wants. Nothing changes. The tapping, the twisting of the knob, and the whispering go on until near dawn. Then it stops. I have no idea what will happen if it ever manages to force the door open. I keep pushing back, physically and mentally, but I'm terrified it might find a way in. I don't know if it will stop on its own or if I'll have to face it someday. Right now, as I press my back against the door, I feel the faint vibration of something on the other side. It's not knocking now. It's more like a gentle, rhythmic push. My phone screen is lit, showing the inside feed. The doorknob is turning erratically, but the hallway feed remains empty. I can hear the chain rattle. It sounds like it might snap if enough force is applied. My throat is tight. My muscles are tensed and the air in here feels too thick to breathe properly. The voices are starting up again, and I can feel my pulse throb in my temples. I'm gripping my phone so hard my hand hurts. That's my reality right now. I have no clever explanation, no comforting theory. I only know the door in front of me keeps shaking at night, the doorknob keeps turning, and I keep hearing my name in whispers. I'm afraid it could escalate. I'm afraid one night it'll just break in without warning. but I can't leave. I have nowhere else to go. So every night I sit here, pushing back against whatever's trying to come through. And every night I try not to panic too much when I hear that soft tapping, calling for me in the dark. It hasn't gotten in yet, but a small voice in the back of my mind keeps telling me that eventually it might. I do everything I can to keep it out, but I'm never sure if that will be enough when tomorrow night rolls around. I still remember how my hands shook the first time it happened. It was a little after midnight and I was lying on the couch watching some late-night show. I heard my phone buzz. I glanced at the screen and saw an unknown number. It looked weird, like it was missing a digit. I hesitated for a second, but I picked it up anyway. On the other end, all I heard was breathing, heavy, labored, slow. It sent a chill through my arms. I said, "Hello," and I heard an echo repeat, "Hello." Then there was a click and the call ended. I thought it might be a prank. I put the phone aside and tried to ignore it, but I couldn't get back into the show. I replayed that sound in my head. The next day, it happened again. This time, I was making dinner. The phone rang, same odd number. I answered quickly because I wanted to confront whoever was doing this. I said, "What do you want?" And I heard my own voice echo back, "What do you want?" Then after a few seconds of that heavy breathing, I heard a low voice whisper something that I couldn't catch. It sounded like one word, maybe two. It was so soft I couldn't figure it out. Then the line disconnected. Over the next week, the calls got more frequent. Sometimes they came in the morning, sometimes in the middle of the night. Each time I heard the same breathing and that strange echo. Sometimes I heard that faint whisper which sounded like it was warning me about something. I tried to listen carefully one night. I pressed the phone tight against my ear. I heard a phrase that sounded like, "A portal is opening." It wasn't clear. The voice was too quiet. But I caught the words portal and opening. It made no sense to me. I hung up, heart pounding. I remember pacing around my living room, waiting for the phone to ring again. My mouth felt dry. The lights in my apartment felt too bright. I shut them off and sat in the dark. I felt safer that way, or at least I felt hidden. The phone stayed silent for about an hour. Then it rang again. I jumped. I answered it, barely able to keep the phone steady. The breathing was louder this time. It sounded strained. I said, "What is this?" And I heard the echo say, "What is this?" Then there was a rasping whisper, and the call ended. I decided to contact the phone company. I told them about the repeated calls, about the strange number. They asked for the digits. I gave it to them. The representative on the line paused for a long time. Then she said that number wasn't active. It had been canceled decades ago. I pressed her to look again. She said the same thing. The line had been disconnected for a long time. There was no record of it being reactivated. I felt an odd tension in my stomach. I asked if it could be a spoofed number. She said maybe, but it was unusual because the system showed nothing. She offered to block it for me. I agreed. She assured me that I wouldn't receive calls from that number anymore. That block didn't work. Later that night, the phone rang again. Same number. I stared at the screen, feeling my pulse in my neck. I accepted the call. The breathing sounded closer now, as if the caller was right next to me. I whispered, "Hello." The echo came back, "Hello." Then I heard that voice again, barely above a breath, saying something about a portal. I shouted into the phone, "Tell me what's going on." The echo repeated, "Tell me what's going on." The caller hung up. I went online. I searched for any stories about old phone numbers that still called people. I found some forum posts about haunted lines, weird phone pranks, urban legends. Nothing concrete. My eyes ached after hours of searching. I slammed the laptop shut and tried to sleep, but my nerves wouldn't let me. I lay awake, listening to every sound in my apartment. The hum of my refrigerator, the ticking of the clock on my wall, the occasional car passing outside. Each time my phone buzzed with a notification or a text from a friend, I jumped, expecting that number again. By the next morning, I was exhausted. The calls continued, sometimes short, sometimes lasting almost a minute. The whisper always came in fragments. I tried to record one call with another device. I set my laptop to record next to the phone, but each time I tried, the whisper got even softer, almost drowned out by the breathing and the echo. I played the recordings back, but I couldn't make out any words beyond portal and opening. It started messing with my head. I couldn't focus on my job. I was on edge all day. I'd check my phone every few minutes, half hoping it wouldn't ring, half anxious that I'd miss something if it did. I decided to go back to the phone company in person. I needed answers. I took a day off work and drove to their main office. I spoke to a technician there. I showed them my call logs. They looked puzzled. They confirmed that the number was inactive. They said they'd never seen a canceled line behave this way. I asked if someone could hijack an old number. They said it was unlikely. I asked them to trace the calls in real time. They said they'd try, but they needed me on the line for that. So I gave them my cell number and I waited in the lobby. Hours passed. The phone didn't ring once. Typical. By the time I left, the call started again. It was like the caller knew. That night, something changed. I was sitting in my kitchen, phone on the table, staring at it. It rang around midnight. I answered. The echo repeated my hello in the same monotone. The breathing was still there. This time, the whisper was more distinct. I heard, "You must not ignore the portal, it's opening." My throat tightened. I managed to choke out, "What do you mean?" The echo repeated me. Then the line cut off. My knees felt shaky, and my forehead was damp. I looked around my kitchen. Everything seemed normal. Dishes in the sink, half-empty glass of water, flickering overhead light. Yet I felt like something was creeping into my apartment. I told a friend about it the next day. He told me to just get rid of my phone. I tried. I got a new number. I thought that would help. For 2 days, it was quiet. No calls from the unknown line. My tension eased a little. I started feeling normal again. I slept better. Then, on the third night, the new phone buzzed. My body tensed up right away. I looked at the screen. Unknown number. I picked up with a shaky hand. Heavy breathing. Echo. Faint whisper. The block. The new number. None of it worked. I felt trapped. I pressed the phone against my ear and said, "Why are you calling me?" The echo repeated, "Why are you calling me?" Then a whisper said, "The portal draws closer." My heart hammered in my chest. I ended the call, throwing my phone onto the couch. I remember pacing around, rubbing my hands together, trying to calm the shaking. I turned on the TV to drown out the quiet. I kept flipping channels, not even registering what was on. I felt paranoid. My phone rang again. I didn't answer. The ringing stopped, then started again. It kept ringing for an hour. I eventually grabbed the phone and shut it off completely. The silence felt thick. I could hear my own breath, ragged and shallow. I went into my bedroom and locked the door even though I was alone. I sat on the floor and held my knees to my chest. I felt sweat dripping down my temples. In the morning, I forced myself to turn the phone on again. There were dozens of missed calls from that number. I listened to a few voicemails. All I heard was breathing and echoes of my own voicemail greeting. No whisper. I deleted them. My stomach felt uneasy. I drank some coffee, but it tasted bitter, and I couldn't finish it. I decided to look for more clues about this portal. I drove to the library. I asked the librarian if there were any records of supernatural incidents in the area or weird phone calls. She pointed me to a small local history section. I flipped through old newspapers, local archives, and random clippings. I found stories about strange phone calls from the 1970s, but nothing that connected to my experience. I left feeling frustrated. Back home, I sat on my couch, phone in hand, waiting. Another call came in. I answered it. I heard the usual breathing. I said nothing. trying not to trigger the echo. The caller stayed on the line, breathing. Then the whisper said, "It's not a joke. Stop trying to run." I felt my gut twist. I asked, "Stop trying to run from what?" Echo. Then the line died. My phone beeped, indicating a new voicemail. I played it. It was just more breathing. I deleted it and put the phone on silent. At that point, I wasn't sure what to do. I wasn't sleeping well. My shoulders felt stiff. My eyes were sore, probably from anxiety and lack of rest. I tried ignoring the calls. I tried blocking the number. Nothing worked. Finally, I called the phone company again. I spoke to a supervisor. He said they tried everything. He suggested I contact the authorities. I laughed bitterly. What would I tell the police? That a canceled phone line kept calling me about a portal? I hung up without taking his advice. That night I sat in my living room with all the lights on. The phone calls came one after another. I let them ring. I watched the screen light up, buzz, then stop. Then it would buzz again. After an hour, I grabbed the phone. I answered. I felt a lump in my throat. I said, "What do you want from me?" My own words echoed back. Then, in that barely audible voice, I heard, "It's opening soon." My voice shook as I asked, "What's opening soon?" Echo. Then click. I pressed my hands to my face. My palms were sweaty against my cheeks. I started to feel strange in my own home. I constantly felt like someone was looking at me from the windows or from corners of my apartment. My heartbeat would spike at random times. I kept hearing that breathing in my head as if it had become a part of my daily life. My dreams, when I did sleep, were filled with the sound of static and muffled words. I tried to trace the number myself. I downloaded some phone tracing apps. None of them helped. I reached out to an acquaintance who worked in IT. He said he could try a reverse lookup, but he needed a complete call record. I emailed him screenshots. He wrote back, telling me the number was flagged as inactive. He found references to it in an old database from the 1980s. There was no current owner. He suggested I switch carriers. I did. I canceled my old plan, got a brand new phone, brand new SIM card, new everything. I even paid in cash, so there would be no record of my personal details. For 2 days, it was quiet again. On the third day with the new phone, I was driving home from work. Traffic was bad. My phone started ringing through my car's speakers. The display showed unknown. My chest tightened. I hesitated, then I pressed the button to answer. Immediately I heard breathing. My skin crawled. I said nothing. The breathing continued. Then the whisper, "You can't stop it." I ended the call and almost rear-ended the car in front of me. I pulled over and parked. I sat there breathing fast, leaning my forehead against the steering wheel. When I got home, I turned off my phone and placed it in a drawer. I tried to eat something, but my appetite was gone. My limbs felt heavy. I stared at my blank TV, not even turning it on. My thoughts were simple. I wanted to know how to stop these calls. I wanted to understand what this portal was and why I was involved. But every time I tried to question the voice, I got the same vague warnings. I didn't know what else to do, so I just sat there waiting for something to happen. Eventually, I turned my phone on again. It rang immediately. I lifted it to my ear. I spoke first. "What's your name?" The echo said, "What's your name?" The breathing paused for a second, then the whisper spoke more words this time. It said, "It's almost here. You're part of it." My mouth went dry. My heart beat so hard that I felt my pulse in my ears. I tried asking more questions, but the line went dead. I dropped the phone on the table and put my head in my hands. I could feel the sweat on the back of my neck. I wanted to run outside, but I knew there was no point. The calls followed me everywhere. I'd changed my number, changed carriers, and it made no difference. It felt like I was trapped in a loop. I decided to unplug completely. I grabbed my phone, shut it down, and tossed it in a drawer again. I unplugged my internet router. I turned off every device that could connect me to the outside world. I spent a week that way, living offline. ignoring my phone. I only turned it on for work calls that I absolutely had to make, and even then I used a separate number from a disposable phone. During that week I felt a bit calmer. The tension in my muscles eased a little, but I was still waiting, always waiting for something to happen. Sometimes at night I thought I heard the phone ring in the drawer, but when I checked, it was silent. On the 8th day, I needed to check my bank balance. I turned on my main phone. Immediately it rang. I looked at the screen. Unknown. I answered. The breathing was there. The whisper said, "It's happening now." My stomach flipped. I asked, "What's happening?" The echo repeated me and the whisper said, "The portal. It's open." Then the call ended. I waited for it to ring again, but it didn't. I tried calling back. The line didn't exist. After that final call, the phone never rang from that number again. I left everything on. Phone, internet, everything. It just never called again. Days passed, then weeks. No more breathing, no more echo, no more whisper. I kept expecting it at every moment, but nothing happened. I waited for some kind of sign that a portal had opened, but everything seemed normal. Work was normal, my apartment was normal. I felt uneasy though. My body was still tense. I still jumped at every phone alert, but that canceled line didn't bother me again. It's been a while now since I got one of those calls. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined it all, but then I look at the call logs still stored on my phone. They're all labeled unknown, with timestamps to prove it. I don't have an explanation. Part of me wants to forget it ever happened. Another part of me feels like it's not over. I keep the phone on silent most of the time. I don't want to jump every time it rings. I just live my life, day by day, aware that something happened that doesn't fit into anything I understand. That's all I can do right now. Keep going, keep my phone nearby, and wait to see if that number ever calls me again. And if it does, I'll be ready to answer. I first noticed the noise late on a Wednesday night. It was a scraping sound, like something dragged across the floor. I sat up on my couch, muted the TV, and waited. The scraping came again, then a thump, like someone dropped a heavy box. It was coming from the apartment next to mine. According to the doorman and the listing online, that place had been empty for months. I had never seen anyone go in or out. There were no lights on at night. Yet there I was, listening to what sounded like furniture shifting on the other side of the wall. I'd been living in this building for 3 months. It's a quiet place, mostly older residents. I wanted peace, so I chose it for its calm hallways and silent nights. But that night I got the opposite. I leaned against the wall that separated my living room from the next apartment. I heard what sounded like slow footsteps pacing back and forth. My heart started to beat faster. I told myself it could be a maintenance worker. Maybe someone had shown up last minute to fix a leak or something. But it was almost midnight, and I knew the management office wouldn't allow repairs at that hour unless it was an emergency. I banged on the wall. Nothing happened for a few seconds. Then there was a soft scrape, like the sound shifted closer to where I stood. I got this chill on my neck. My arms felt tense, and I realized I was sweating a bit. I didn't want to call anyone yet. Instead, I tried to ignore it. I went to my bedroom, turned on a fan, and fell asleep after an hour of tossing and turning. The next morning, I decided to stop by the front desk on my way out. The doorman's name is Carlos. He's an older guy, friendly but a little guarded. I told him I heard noises in the apartment next door. I asked if someone had moved in without me noticing. He frowned. He said nobody had moved into that unit for a long time. He said the place was vacant and had been for months. He shrugged and told me it wasn't the first time someone reported strange sounds from there. The last tenants left in a hurry. They complained about weird happenings, furniture moving by itself, footsteps at odd hours. They only stayed 2 weeks before they broke the lease. I asked if maintenance was in there for any reason. He said no. Then he warned me to be careful if I tried to check it out on my own. That made me uneasy, but it also sparked my curiosity. I went to work. I tried to forget about it. but my mind kept returning to that scraping sound. I replayed it in my head all day. By the time I got home in the evening, I was determined to check it out. I unlocked my door, dropped off my bag, and pressed my ear against the shared wall. Nothing. For a while, I heard only my own breathing and the faint hum of the air conditioner. Then around 9 p.m., I heard a soft bump like something hitting the wall from the other side. I waited, heart pounding, and banged on the wall. Again, total silence. That's when I decided to go into the hallway. The door to the next apartment was a few steps away. The hallway was empty. The lights were dim. I could smell the faint odor of fresh paint from the floor below. But that was it. I turned the handle on the door next to mine. Locked. I felt a wave of relief, like maybe it was all in my head. But then I heard a thump from behind the door. I pressed my ear against it and my pulse quickened. It sounded like someone walking slowly across the living room inside that unit. I felt a wave of heat under my collar. I knocked on the door. "Hello?" I said. No answer. I waited. After a few seconds, I heard 3 distinct taps from the other side, like a response. I'm not sure if it was a coincidence or if something was actually there. My skin felt tight and my hands were clammy. I stood there for a moment, not sure what to do. Eventually, I backed away, went into my apartment, and locked the door. That night, I barely slept. I kept hearing faint noises in the quiet. I checked the time repeatedly, and each time I'd sit up in bed, my heart beating way too fast. By morning, I felt drained. On my way out, I tried talking to Carlos again. He just shook his head. He said something about how people never stay there long. He told me they always leave complaining of cold spots, scraping sounds, and footsteps. He gave me a sympathetic look and asked me not to get too involved. By the next evening, I couldn't handle the tension anymore. I wanted answers. I bought a small flashlight, one with a bright LED beam. I also grabbed my pocket knife, though I didn't really expect to need it. I just felt safer having something in my hand if things got weird. After dinner, around 8 p.m., I headed to the door next to mine. I knocked again. No response. The hallway was quiet. The smell of cleaning products lingered in the air from the janitor's shift. I tried the handle, locked. I slid a small piece of metal into the crack of the door, hoping it might push the latch. I'm no locksmith, but I'd seen a few videos online. After a few minutes of fumbling, I felt the latch give. I turned the handle again and pulled the door open. My pulse was racing. I felt like I was doing something illegal. Technically, I was. But my curiosity overrode my common sense. Inside, the apartment was dark. I flicked on my flashlight and stepped in. It was mostly empty, except for a few pieces of abandoned furniture. An old coffee table in the living room, a single chair in the corner, and some dusty shelves in the hallway. The air smelled stale, like it hadn't been aired out in a long time. I moved the beam of light across the walls. There were no paintings or decorations. Everything was bare. I heard my own footsteps echo on the floor. I closed the door behind me, leaving only the flashlight beam to guide me. I stood still and listened. Nothing at first, just the sound of my breathing. I walked into the living room. The windows were closed and covered by old blinds. Dust floated in the flashlight's beam. I felt uneasy, like someone was watching me. I swung the light around. Empty corners, blank walls. My pulse thudded in my ears. I called out, "Hello?" My voice sounded too loud. It bounced off the walls. No response. I went through the hallway, shining the light into the bedroom. It had a mattress on the floor, stained and worn. A small dresser stood by the wall. I noticed scratches on the floor near the bed, like deep grooves, as if someone had dragged heavy furniture around. The closet door was open. I looked inside. Empty. The smell in there was musty, like old laundry. My heart was pounding against my ribs. I kept thinking I'd see a person crouched in a corner or behind a door. I stood in the middle of the bedroom listening. Then I heard it. A scraping sound, coming from the living room. I nearly dropped the flashlight. The noise was exactly what I'd heard from my side of the wall. I took a step toward the hallway, shining my light ahead. My mouth felt dry, and I realized I was breathing in short, sharp bursts. My arms felt tight, and I had a tremor in my hands. I forced myself forward back into the living room. It was empty. The old coffee table stood in the same position. I walked over to it and nudged it with my foot. It squeaked across the floor, making a similar scraping sound. But that didn't explain the footsteps I'd heard before, or why the sounds happened when I was in my own living room. I ran the flashlight over the walls. Nothing unusual. Then as I turned toward the front door, I heard another sound behind me. A soft bump on the floor, like something dropping from waist height. I spun around. Nothing there. The coffee table was still. The chair in the corner hadn't moved, but my neck hair stood up like I was being observed. I tried to speak, but my throat was too dry. I managed to say, "Is anyone here?" Silence. Then a faint shuffle came from the corner near the chair. I aimed my flashlight there. The chair was in the same place. The shadows looked ordinary. I took a step closer, and that's when I heard the quiet squeak of the floor behind me, like a single footstep. I whirled around. Nobody. My heart thudded so hard that I felt dizzy. The front door was closed. I didn't see anything else, but the air felt denser, like there was a presence in the apartment besides me. I wanted to leave right then, but I also wanted some explanation. I stepped back into the hallway and tried the bathroom door. Inside, the bathroom was small, a typical layout. I swept the flashlight around. The mirror was dirty, the sink had dust and some old soap residue. The shower curtain was half drawn. I pushed it aside. Empty tub. No signs of anything unusual. But my stomach was in knots. I moved back into the living room. The single overhead light fixture had no bulb. The only illumination came from my flashlight. I saw my reflection in the glass of the window. I looked pale and my eyes were wide. Then I heard what sounded like whispering right behind me. I can't even tell if it was words or just the brush of air, but it made my spine tighten. I turned around so fast that I bumped into the coffee table and nearly fell. My flashlight beam wobbled across the walls. Again, nothing. Just an empty corner. That was it. I walked straight to the front door. I wanted out. My hand reached for the knob, and I realized the door was closed tighter than before. I twisted the knob. It opened, but I felt resistance, like something pressed against it. I tugged harder, and it gave way, letting me step into the hallway. I shut the door behind me and stood there, breathing hard, feeling my pulse in my neck. I hurried back to my own apartment, locked the door, and leaned against it. I felt a warm rush of relief. Then I realized my hands were shaking. I sat on my couch for a while, staring at my dark TV screen, trying to calm down. Every little sound in the building made me jump. I got up after a few minutes, poured myself some water, and drank it in big gulps. Over the next few days, I tried to focus on my normal life. I went to work, grabbed groceries, kept up with my usual routine. But every night I heard something from next door. Sometimes it was a quick scratching sound. Other times it was a series of soft thumps. When I saw Carlos in the lobby, he just gave me a look that said he knew what was happening and he knew I was spooked. He didn't bring it up and I didn't either. I started wearing headphones when I got home, playing music or random podcasts to block out the noise. Sometimes I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of furniture dragging. It was as if someone rearranged the entire apartment at 3 a.m. I tried to just ignore it. I kept telling myself there had to be a logical reason. Maybe some squatters had a key. Maybe it was a prank. But in the back of my mind, I knew it felt different than that. One weekend, I worked up the courage to go back inside. During the afternoon, I picked the lock again. I expected the same stale, dusty space. But the coffee table was in a different spot. It was angled closer to the middle of the room. The chair was now by the window, facing the blinds. I had no explanation for how they moved. I checked the floor for footprints or drag marks. The dust was disturbed in a few places, but I couldn't see any shoe prints. I felt a wave of fear. I backed away, not wanting to stay there any longer. I shut the door and returned to my apartment. My hands were trembling. My head felt light. I couldn't decide if I was scared or angry or just exhausted. The tension built inside my chest. I realized I didn't want to live like this, jumping at every noise and dreading bedtime. That night, the sounds were louder than usual. I thought about calling the police, but what would I say? I hear noises in an empty apartment. Doesn't sound urgent. Around 11 p.m., as I tried to watch a show on my laptop, I heard something slam against our shared wall. It was so strong that the picture frames on my wall shook. I jumped up and went into the hallway again. The building was quiet, no neighbors around. I felt panic in my chest as I stared at that door. It was locked again. I didn't dare open it. I just stood there waiting for another slam. But it never came. I went back inside my apartment, turned off all the lights, and sat in the dark living room. I listened. The noises started up again around midnight. Soft scraping, then heavy steps. They seemed to move from one end of the apartment to the other. Then a low thump, like a chair being knocked over. My heart raced. The sweat on my forehead felt cold. I was too scared to go back out. I stayed there, forcing myself to remain quiet and still. When I finally slept, it was close to dawn. I woke up late, feeling stiff and drained. I knew I had to make a choice about living here. Either I'd get used to it or I'd move out, but I wasn't ready to give up my place. I liked everything else about this building. I decided to speak to the management office, but they said there's no record of an official complaint, and that if the apartment is vacant, there's nothing they can do unless I file a formal report. Carlos gave me a sympathetic shrug. He said most people just leave or ignore it. He admitted that the apartment has a weird reputation, but it's never caused a real problem, just fear and frustration. I realized I might be stuck with this situation, so I tried to adapt. I tried to treat the noises like random building creaks or plumbing sounds. It's not easy. Every time I hear scraping, I get a spike of adrenaline. Every time I sense movement, my stomach churns. But I haven't gone back inside since that day. I don't see a reason to. I know it's empty. I also know something is in there, even if I can't explain it. Now, I do my best to live around it. I sleep with a fan on, or a white noise machine. Sometimes I still wake up to what sounds like chairs scraping across the floor. Sometimes I think I hear muffled footsteps near the wall. Every once in a while, I'll knock on that wall, and I hear a faint knock back. I can't tell if I imagine it or if it's real. But I know one thing. The apartment is never truly empty when I'm near it, and I'm just trying to hold on to my sanity, one uneasy night at a time. I need to get this off my chest right away. Something strange happened to me a few nights ago, and it hasn't left my mind since. I heard church bells in the middle of the night, even though the old chapel in my town has been locked up for years. I don't usually pay attention to random noises, but these bells were too clear to ignore. I decided to check it out that same night, and it's been haunting me ever since. I live in a small house on a quiet road. Nothing much happens around here after dark. People shut their doors early and the streets stay empty. On that particular night, I couldn't sleep. It was around 1 in the morning when I first heard the bells. It started with one single ring, then a series of slow, consistent chimes. I listened from my bed, certain it was coming from outside. The sound was too loud to be a simple wind chime or something small near a neighbor's yard. My heart started beating harder because I knew about the abandoned chapel a couple of blocks away. People around here avoid it. No one talks about it. As far as I know, it's been boarded up for a long time. But those bells were coming from that direction. I hesitated. I stared at my bedroom window, thinking maybe I should just ignore it. But curiosity got the best of me. I threw on a jacket, put on some shoes, and stepped outside. The air felt cold against my face and my breath turned visible under the porch light. The street was empty. No cars, no signs of life. But those bells kept ringing in a steady pattern. There were 5 or 6 rings, then a short pause, and then it repeated. I started walking, keeping my hands in my pockets, listening for any change in the pattern. As I approached the chapel, I noticed it looked the same as always from the outside. Boarded windows, a heavy wooden door with a rusted padlock, and walls covered in patches of mold. The place gave me a chill, but the bells were coming from inside, clear and without any distortion. I walked around to check if there was another entrance. Nothing. All the doors and windows were shut tight. The front door didn't budge when I pulled on it. I even tried pushing against it with my shoulder, but it felt solid. Meanwhile, the bells kept ringing, each sound echoing around the walls outside. Then I heard voices. They sounded like a choir, humming in low tones, as if they were chanting something in a language I didn't recognize. Maybe it was Latin. Hard to be sure, but it had that deep old quality. It wasn't a melody. It was more like a flat, droning chant. The combination of those bells and the chanting made the hair on my arm stand up. I walked around the perimeter again, looking for any break or gap in the boards, but everything was sealed. The chanting got louder near the back wall, but I still couldn't find a way in. I remember pressing my ear against the cold surface of a wooden plank that covered a window. The wood felt damp, and a bit of rot came off on my hand. I listened. The voices felt close, like there was only a thin space between me and the source of the sound. I felt my heartbeat pounding against my chest. I tried knocking on the wood, but there was no response. The chanting just kept going. After another minute, the bells rang again, and that vibration seemed to move through the boards and into my bones. I took a step back, suddenly feeling a surge of anxiety. I realized how exposed I was, alone in the middle of the night with a mysterious noise coming from a locked building. I decided to leave. Walking back home, I kept looking over my shoulder. I half expected someone to emerge from the chapel and follow me, but no one came out. The bells eventually stopped, and the chanting died down as soon as I got about a block away. By the time I reached my front door, the night felt strangely silent. I went back to bed, but I couldn't sleep. My skin felt clammy, and my heart was still racing. I kept hearing the echo of those bells in my mind, and I kept recalling that low, monotonous chanting. It was like it was still in the room with me. The next day, I woke up feeling exhausted. I tried to go about my usual routine: shower, breakfast, a quick trip to the local grocery store for supplies. But I felt on edge the entire time. In the shower, I could have sworn I heard a faint chant rising from behind the noise of the water. It was more like a background hum, but I recognized that pattern from the night before. It made my stomach clench, and I turned off the water to listen. Everything went quiet. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination. I dressed quickly and left the house, trying not to dwell on it. At the grocery store, I grabbed a cart and wandered the aisles. People around me were minding their own business. I tried to focus on the shelves, picking out items, trying to distract myself. But I felt a constant pressure in my ears, like something was on the edge of my hearing. It wasn't loud, but it reminded me of that same humming chant. I checked behind me once, and I nearly dropped a can of soup. No one was there, but the feeling wouldn't go away. By the time I got home, I was jumpy. My hands shook a little when I unlocked the door. I told myself I needed to relax and that I was overthinking. I tried to settle on the couch, watch some TV, maybe catch the local news. The anchor's voice sounded normal, but I couldn't concentrate on what she was saying. My mind kept drifting back to that locked chapel and those eerie voices. I kept turning the volume up, but I still sensed a low hum beneath the sound of the TV. It was almost like white noise, but I recognized the pattern of the chant. My chest felt tight. I started pacing around the living room, looking out the window every few minutes. That night, I considered going to bed early, but I was too wound up. Around 11, I heard the bells again, very faint. It was like they were muffled, but they definitely had the same tone as the previous night. I tried to ignore them, but my heartbeat sped up anyway. I laid in bed with the lights off, staring at the ceiling. I wondered if anyone else in the neighborhood heard the bells or if it was just me. I felt a sense of isolation and fear. Normally, I would have called a friend to ask, but I didn't want anyone thinking I was losing my mind. I tossed and turned for hours. At some point, I dozed off, but I woke up again around 3 in the morning. The room felt cold. My skin felt damp with sweat. I realized the chanting was in my head, or maybe it was outside, but it sounded close, like it was right next to my ear. I jumped out of bed, turned on every light in the house, and checked each window and door to make sure no one had broken in. Everything was locked, and the windows were secure. But that chanting was there, just under the surface of the silence. I tried covering my ears with my hands. It didn't help. The following day, I couldn't concentrate on anything. I tried reading a newspaper, but I kept scanning the same lines without understanding them. My heart would race whenever I thought about the chapel. I felt a knot in my stomach. My appetite disappeared. By late afternoon, I decided to drive by the chapel, just to confirm it was still locked up and that nothing had changed. I hoped that seeing it in daylight might help me feel better. I parked my car nearby and walked over. The street was deserted. The chapel looked the same. Boarded windows, locked doors, and a rundown appearance. There was no sound of bells and no chanting in the daylight. Still, the sight of it gave me an uneasy feeling. I stood there for a few minutes, listening to the wind rustle through the trees. I didn't hear anything unusual, but my palms were sweaty, and my knees felt weak. I turned around and headed back to my car. On the drive home, I kept glancing at the rearview mirror, expecting to see something I couldn't explain. Nothing appeared. That night, the bells started again, louder this time. It was around midnight. I had the TV on, some late-night show, but I muted it to be sure I was hearing the bells correctly. They sounded the same as on the first night, but I picked up on a slight difference in rhythm. It wasn't just a random toll. It almost sounded like a slow pattern, maybe a call and response with the chanting. I felt my throat tighten. My hands shook, and I rubbed them on my pants to steady them. Then behind the bells I heard the voices. They were so faint at first, but they built up until they filled my ears with that humming monotone. I ran to my front door, yanked it open, and stepped onto my porch. The cold air rushed in. I stood there listening. The bells were distinct. The chanting was faint but present, like a distant choir. The night was dark, and I couldn't see the chapel from my porch, but I knew that's where it was coming from. I stepped down onto the lawn, hesitated, and then forced myself to take a few more steps toward the street. My heart pounded so hard I thought I might pass out. I didn't want to go all the way there again. The idea of seeing that locked door and those boarded windows made my stomach churn. So I turned around and went back inside, locking the door behind me. I stood in my living room, breathing hard, trying to calm down. I spent that entire night awake, listening to those bells and the chanting. They seemed to swell and fade in waves. Sometimes it was so quiet I thought it was gone. Then it would rise up again, making my skin prickle. Around 4 in the morning, I felt like I couldn't breathe. My hands went numb for a moment, and I realized I was having some kind of panic episode. I sat on the edge of my couch, focusing on taking slow breaths. That chanting was like a constant presence, and the bells rang off and on until dawn. When morning arrived, I was beyond exhausted. My reflection in the bathroom mirror showed dark circles under my eyes, and my skin looked pale. I had to face the possibility that I might be imagining some of this. But I remembered how real it sounded when I was right next to the chapel. I recalled the locked doors, the rotting boards, and the intense clarity of those bells. It didn't feel like a simple hallucination. Over the next few days, the sounds continued at random times, not just at night. I could be fixing a simple meal in the kitchen, and suddenly I'd hear a faint ring of that bell. I'd go to the window to check, but everything looked normal outside. The chanting also became more persistent in my mind. Even if I turned on loud music, I sensed the chanting behind the noise, like it was following me. Sometimes I'd catch myself gripping the edge of the counter or a chair, feeling a jolt of raw fear. My heart would speed up, and I'd break into a cold sweat. Sleep became nearly impossible. I'd fall asleep around midnight and wake up every hour, certain I heard a bell or a whisper. My nerves were shot. I started skipping meals because my appetite was gone. My phone rang once, just a telemarketer, but the sound startled me so much that my hands were trembling when I answered. I realized I couldn't go on like this. I had to figure out what was happening or at least find a way to cope. I tried contacting an old acquaintance from a neighboring town. He's not exactly a friend, but someone I talked to a few times at community events. He didn't pick up, so I left a short message. I didn't mention the bells or chanting in detail. I just said I was dealing with something weird and asked if he knew anything about that old chapel. He didn't call back. I tried asking a local store clerk if they'd heard anything unusual at night. They just shrugged and said no. I felt even more alone. Finally, I decided to see if there was a local record of who owned that chapel. Maybe I could get permission to go inside and see what was causing the noise. But the town hall was closed for renovations that week, and the administrative office was understaffed. I waited in line for nearly an hour, only to be told they had no immediate records available. They told me to come back another time. I left, feeling frustrated and tired. Now I'm in my living room writing this down while the sun is still up, hoping it'll keep the fear at bay. But even in the daylight, I hear those bells from time to time. They're not as loud, but they're there. The chanting lingers in the back of my mind like a low drone that never fully disappears. My hands are shaky, and my head hurts from lack of sleep. I keep checking the time, dreading the moment the sun goes down. I don't know what will happen tonight or if this will keep going. But I wanted to share everything as it happened, in straightforward terms, in case it helps me piece things together. That's where I stand. I'm alone in my house, hearing bells from a sealed chapel and voices I can't explain. The feeling of being followed by those ghostly echoes has become a daily reality. I can't escape the sensation that they're with me, that I can't outrun them. Maybe they're in my head, or maybe there's something else going on. Either way, it's real enough to keep me on edge every single day. I'm not sure what I'll do next, but I had to tell someone. I want to believe it's a trick of the mind, but it's too persistent, too vivid. All I can do now is wait and see if this gets any worse. I'm hoping something changes, or that I find some explanation. But it feels like I'm stuck in a loop, and the echo of that chanting won't stop following me. I felt a chill the moment I pried up the rotten floorboards in the old basement. I saw a circle of stone beneath the dust, and the edges looked sealed with some thick mortar. It didn't belong there. It didn't match the rest of the foundation. I crouched and poked at it, then gave it a few taps with my flashlight. It sounded hollow. Right away, my stomach tightened. I had come here to restore this place, not to uncover hidden things. But I couldn't walk away. I grabbed a pry bar and started chipping at the mortar. It crumbled fast. When I lifted that rough stone lid, I saw a dark, hollow space. It was a well, sealed long ago under the floor. At first, I only thought it was an interesting find. I had no idea how much it would change my nights. My name is Eric, and I've been working on this house for about 2 weeks. I bought it at an auction because the price was too good. The structure needed a lot of work. There was water damage on the roof, cracks in the walls, and mold in the basement. The place was huge, with multiple rooms and a large yard out back. I took a leave from my job so I could spend every day here, doing repairs and saving money by handling most of the labor myself. I planned to refurbish the interior and then fix up the outside. I wanted to restore its old charm. The first few days passed quietly. Then I discovered the well. When I pulled the stone lid to the side, I looked down into a dark shaft. It smelled like damp earth and stale air. I shined my flashlight inside and noticed wet stones that went down about 15 or 20 feet. The water at the bottom wasn't visible from my angle, but I guessed there was some water because the air felt cold and heavy. I didn't see anything else. I left the well uncovered for the day, thinking I might seal it again later in a better way, just to keep the basement safe. By the time evening arrived, I decided to cover it with a piece of plywood so nobody would trip or fall in. Then I walked upstairs to clean up. That night, around 5 or 6 p.m., I went down to the basement to double-check the new supports I'd installed under some beams. While I was there, I heard what sounded like a gentle trickle of water coming from the well. I paused and listened. It was faint, but it was clear. I also heard something else. Something like a low murmur or whisper. It was so soft that I couldn't catch any real words or sounds. It could have been the wind or my own ears playing tricks. Still, it made the hairs on my arms stand on end. I shined my flashlight around, expecting to see a drip or something. Nothing. The basement was empty, and the plywood over the well looked the same. I started feeling uneasy, so I went back upstairs and locked the basement door. The next afternoon, I had to work on repairing some plumbing in the kitchen. I tried to focus on the pipes and the tasks in front of me, but the memory of those faint murmurs stayed with me. My shoulders felt tense. My mind kept drifting to the sealed well. The day went by slower than usual. My hands shook a bit when I hammered nails or measured new cuts of lumber. Around 5 p.m. I realized I needed some tools that I'd left in the basement. I didn't want to go down there, but I forced myself to. I flicked on the basement lights and walked down the steps. Everything seemed quiet. The plywood was still on top of the well. I stepped over to my tool bag, picked it up, and headed back toward the stairs. Then I heard that sound of water again, trickling somewhere below the plywood. At the same time, I felt this sudden drop in temperature. My breath caught in my throat. I turned around, expecting something, but there was nothing to see, just the dim light bulb and the dusty floor. I walked over to the well and slowly lifted the plywood. The darkness inside felt deeper than before. I shined my flashlight downward. The water must have been rising because now I could see a faint glow of reflection at the bottom. It rippled a bit, like something was moving. I leaned closer, trying to see better. My flashlight flickered, and in that brief moment I saw wet handprints on the rim of the well. They were fresh, as if someone had just placed their palms on the stones from inside. My heart started pounding in my chest. I backed away, almost tripping over my own feet. Then I slammed the plywood back in place and ran upstairs, leaving the light on behind me. That night, I couldn't settle. I kept hearing those faint murmurs in my head. My chest felt tight, and my stomach churned with anxiety. I tried to watch some TV in the living room, but every few minutes I caught myself listening for noises under the floor. By the time it was around 10 p.m., I couldn't relax at all. I decided to set up a temporary bed in a room on the second floor, hoping I'd be far away from the basement. My mind raced with images of those wet handprints. I felt my palms sweating, and my pulse was going fast. Eventually, I dozed off. In the middle of the night, I woke up. My eyes opened suddenly. I listened. The house was quiet. I tried to tell myself it was just nerves. Then I noticed something. The air had that same damp chill, the same feeling I'd had when I was near the well. It was subtle, but it was definitely there. I sat up in bed and looked toward the hallway. It was dark. I didn't see movement. I grabbed my flashlight and walked down the stairs. The entire house felt still, like it was holding its breath. I got to the basement door, but I didn't want to open it. My legs felt heavy. My heart was pounding so hard I heard it in my ears. I kept telling myself this was just an old house with some old plumbing. Maybe it was normal. I turned around and went back upstairs, ignoring the nagging feeling in the back of my head. The next morning, I decided to examine the well in the daylight. The basement felt less intimidating with the morning sun seeping through the small windows. I slowly removed the plywood again. I forced myself to look around the rim. The wet handprints were faint, but I could still see the outlines if I looked closely. I rubbed my fingers over them, and the stone felt damp, like the moisture had seeped into the surface. I looked down into the well with my flashlight. The water was dark, but I could hear it dripping somewhere deeper. It echoed up the shaft. I tried to see if there was anything down there, but I couldn't make out any shapes. Still, my gut told me something wasn't right. Over the next few days, I threw myself into my work on the house. I tried to stay on the upper floors as much as possible. I installed new cabinets in the kitchen and fixed some wiring in the living room. The place was starting to look better. But every evening, around 5 or 6 p.m., I felt uneasy. I could sense a change in the air. It always started with that soft, dripping sound. I didn't have to be in the basement to hear it. If I was on the ground floor, I could pick it up faintly through the floorboards. It sounded like a steady trickle, followed by hushed voices or whispers that I couldn't fully decipher. My chest would tighten, and I'd feel a burst of adrenaline. Sometimes I just froze in place, holding my breath, trying to convince myself that it was my mind playing tricks. I started leaving the house in the afternoons to avoid that time of day. I'd go to the hardware store or grab a bite to eat. Sometimes I'd just drive around for a while, letting the hours pass. I didn't want to admit that I was afraid to be in my own house during those hours, but I was. And every time I came back, I worried about what I might find. I imagined the plywood slid off the well, or I imagined wet footprints across the basement floor. So far, I hadn't seen footprints, but the handprints remained. Some days they looked like they had multiplied or shifted in position, but I couldn't be sure if it was just me or if they really changed. I tried wiping them away with a cloth and some bleach, but a faint outline always remained. One evening, I decided I had to confront this. I brought a strong lantern and a rope ladder. I wanted to see if there was anything physically down there. I didn't plan on climbing in completely, but I thought I'd lower the ladder and shine the lantern around to check the walls. So I went down to the basement at around 4 p.m., giving myself enough time to set up. I opened the well and secured the ladder to a metal support. Then I lowered it into the darkness. I turned on the lantern and inched it down, leaning over the rim, trying to keep my balance. As the lantern got closer to the water, I saw the wet stones glisten. The well's walls had a lot of moss. The water surface was still. Nothing appeared to be moving. I held the ladder with one hand and reached the lantern in with the other. Then I heard a splash below, soft, like a quick movement. My body jerked, my hand slipped, and the lantern swayed, nearly hitting the wall. I recovered my grip and shined the light again, but the water looked still. I felt my heart pounding in my throat. I decided that was enough. I pulled the lantern out and yanked the rope ladder back up. My hands were shaking. My shirt clung to my back from sweat, even though the air felt cold. That night, the murmurs were louder than before. Around 7 p.m., I was in the living room, checking some electrical connections. Then I heard something from the basement. It sounded like a low voice calling out, but I couldn't make out words. It made my chest tighten. My arms felt weak. My mind raced with questions. Am I losing it? Is there someone down there? Could there be an actual person who snuck in? I ran to get my flashlight and a heavy wrench. I gripped the wrench so hard my knuckles turned white. I opened the basement door and shouted, "Who's down there?" No answer. I descended the stairs, flicking on the lights. The overhead bulb flickered. I noticed droplets of water near the well, forming a faint trail on the floor. They led toward the far corner, then stopped. The plywood was still over the well, but it looked shifted, like it had been moved or pushed from underneath. I felt my face go hot with panic. I inched closer, expecting to see it fly off, but nothing happened. I tapped the plywood with my wrench. It made a dull thud. I stood there for at least 2 minutes, listening. Eventually, I slid the plywood back into a centered position, then hurried upstairs, locking the door again. Sleep became impossible. My nights turned into tense waits for the next sound or the next sign that something was moving down there. Even when I tried earplugs or music, I felt vibrations through the floor. I sat up in bed, clenching my jaw, feeling my pulse in my neck. My arms and legs felt jittery. Sometimes I couldn't keep my hands steady enough to handle simple tasks, like using the phone. I made sure to keep every door locked, but I kept thinking about the fact that something might be able to move through the house from below. The idea made my spine tingle. On the 10th day after discovering the well, I decided to seal it again. I bought fresh mortar and heavy slabs of stone. I was determined, but as soon as I set foot in the basement that afternoon, I felt a strong sense of pressure in my chest. My hair stood on end. I stepped up to the well, grabbed the plywood, and flung it aside. I knelt down and started to apply mortar around the rim. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I spread it thick, then placed a new stone cover on top. While I was pressing it into place, I heard those faint whispers from inside the well. I couldn't understand them, but they sounded urgent. My breath came in short, sharp bursts. I hammered the stone down, sealing the edges, mixing more mortar to fill every gap. When I finished, I backed away and waited. The mortar needed to dry. I stood there silently for a long time, waiting to see if the stone would shift, or if I would hear something break through. The basement stayed quiet, but the quiet felt wrong. There was a sense of tension, like a held breath. That night, I still heard the trickle of water through the floor, but it was more distant. I braced myself, expecting the murmurs to return. They came at around 6 p.m. They were muffled like they were behind a thick wall. The floor vibrated slightly under my feet when I went to check the basement door. I didn't go down there. I just stood at the top of the stairs, feeling my legs tremble. The steps looked dark, and the light switch was at the bottom. I didn't want to risk it. I could imagine the stone cover sliding off again or cracks forming in the mortar. I imagined a wet hand gripping the rim. My throat felt dry, and I swallowed hard. I told myself I wouldn't check. I'd stay upstairs. If it stayed sealed, maybe it would stay buried. Over the next few days, the murmurs persisted in the late afternoons. I'd stand against the basement door, listening, with my heart pounding. The water sounds came and went. I kept seeing small water stains on the basement ceiling, like droplets trying to seep through. I left them alone. Sometimes I'd hear a soft scraping, like stone against stone, but I never opened the door. Eventually, I started sleeping at a motel in town, avoiding the house at night. It was the only way I could calm my racing thoughts. Now, it's been a week since I fully sealed the well. The noises haven't stopped completely. Every time I step into the house after sunset, I notice that damp chill. The basement door feels colder, and sometimes I swear I hear a faint tapping from below. I double-check the mortar every morning, and it seems intact. But I know it's there, whatever it is, waiting. I'm afraid that if I stay here too long, I'll start hearing it in my head again. I haven't let anyone else come in to see it. I don't want them to question what I've done or try to open the well again. I might sell this place once I finish basic repairs. But deep down, I know that well is sealed in a hurried, anxious way. And I'm not sure how strong my job was. Sometimes at dusk, I stand in the kitchen and feel the floor beneath me vibrate. I feel my stomach twist in knots. My skin goes clammy. I picture wet hands gripping the stones and pulling upward. And the worst part is that I have no clue what might happen if those hands make it all the way to the top. I never expected to feel uneasy in my uncle's old storage room. I went up there to find a suitcase and maybe sort through some boxes of family junk. It was hot and the overhead light flickered every time I moved. Dust got all over my clothes, and I kept sneezing. At first I just wanted to get out of there, but I saw a small trunk near the window, half buried under a bunch of folded tarps. It had my uncle's initials on it, so I got curious. I shoved the tarps aside, unlatched the trunk and lifted the lid. Inside, I found a stack of faded photographs and an old Polaroid camera. It looked like it hadn't been touched in years. The handle was cracked, and the lens was covered in a thin layer of dust. I picked up the camera and blew off some of the dust. My eyes watered, and I coughed a bit. When I looked closer, I saw that the Polaroid still had a few shots left in it. There was a half-open pack of film inside the trunk, too. The old pictures on top of the stack showed random family gatherings, people standing near a barbecue grill, some relatives smiling with drinks in their hands. No one looked upset or frightened. Everything seemed normal. I flipped through a few more photos. The lighting was bad in some, and others had people standing off-center. But I didn't see anything that screamed weird. I shrugged, figured it was just standard family stuff, and put them back. Later that evening, I decided to test the Polaroid. I was bored, and something about vintage cameras always felt kind of fun to me. I stepped outside onto the front porch. The sun was setting, and the light was perfect for a test shot. I framed the driveway in the camera's viewfinder, clicked the shutter, and listened to the familiar whir as the photograph ejected. I waited the recommended time, then watched the picture come to life. It showed the driveway and part of the yard, But in the bottom right corner, there was a faint dark smudge. It looked like a shadow, but I couldn't figure out where it was coming from. There wasn't anything around me that could cast a shape like that. The tree was too far to the left and the fence was behind me. I chalked it up to old film or a dirty lens. I went back inside and wiped the lens with a microfiber cloth. I took another shot in the kitchen, facing the hallway. Same thing. This time the shadow was on the left side of the photo near the doorway. It was darker and more distinct. It almost looked like part of a shape, maybe the edge of someone's shoulder. I looked over at the doorway. The hallway was empty. No one was around. My uncle was downstairs watching TV, oblivious to what I was doing. I looked at the picture again. The shadow shape was still there, plain as day. My neck started itching, and I felt a little lightheaded. I told myself it was just some odd reflection. I decided to test the camera in a few different lighting conditions. Over the next hour, I took about 4 more photos. One in the living room, one in the backyard, one in the garage, and one on the sidewalk outside. In every photo, I saw a strange shadow off to one side or in the background. Each time it looked darker, almost like it had some mass. I couldn't see a face, but it was shaped like a person. It freaked me out. I rubbed my arms and felt the hairs standing up. I pulled out the old photos from the trunk and started examining them under a lamp in the living room. They were mostly family shots, but I noticed that in some of them, if I looked hard enough, there was a strange dark spot here or there, often near the edges. It was subtle, but once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. It had the same vaguely human shape. I checked about 20 pictures, and in at least half of them, I spotted that same shape. It was never front and center. It was always lurking in the background or the corner, almost hidden by furniture or part of the scene. I felt a lump in my throat, and my stomach felt cold. I tried to show my uncle, but he shrugged it off. He said the camera was old, the film was probably expired, and I was letting my imagination run wild. I didn't push it. Instead, I went to my room with the pictures. I spread them out on my desk under a bright lamp. I studied them one by one, comparing angles and lighting. Some of these photos were 20 years old. Others looked more recent. In every set, there was that figure, or at least a piece of it. Sometimes it was a full outline. Other times it was just a hint of a limb or the side of a head. But it was always the same size, the same dark tone. I felt an uneasy pressure in my chest. The next morning I tried again. I snapped a few shots around the house, making sure I stood in places where I knew the light source wouldn't cause odd shadows. In each shot, the shape got clearer. By the time I took the third picture, I could make out what looked like an arm, or maybe a torso behind me. I walked around checking behind doors and looking for anything that could mess with the lighting. There was nothing. I took a step back, wiped sweat off my forehead, and tried to calm down. My heart was pounding. My hands felt clammy. I started thinking maybe the camera was doing something supernatural, but that made no sense. It was just an old Polaroid. There had to be some logical explanation. But the more I looked at the photos, the more I felt that heavy sensation in my gut. Each time I blinked, I pictured that dark figure creeping behind me. I didn't see it with my own eyes. It was only in the photos. But it was there. I decided to run a test. I used my phone's camera to take a picture of the exact same scene. I placed the Polaroid on a table, framed the same spot with my phone, and clicked. The phone picture showed nothing unusual. The Polaroid showed that same shadow leaning around the side of a chair. My hands shook. I dropped the Polaroid photo on the floor and had to pick it up. I felt my heart thudding against my chest wall. I called a friend over that afternoon just to have another set of eyes. I didn't say why. I just said I wanted to show him something in my uncle's house. When he arrived, we went into the living room. I laid out the Polaroids on the coffee table. He looked them over, frowning. He said it looked like a glitch or maybe a smudge on the lens. I told him I cleaned the lens. He shrugged. Then I asked him to stand in the room while I took a Polaroid shot and a cell phone shot of him in the same spot. We waited for the Polaroid to develop. We both saw it at the same time. a tall, shadowy shape right behind him like it was leaning over his shoulder. He yelped and jumped away. He spun around, looking at the empty air behind him. There was nothing there. He stared at me, his face pale. He grabbed his keys and said he had to go. He didn't give me a reason. He just got out of there. I didn't blame him. I felt a tightness in my own chest. The house felt stuffy and oppressive. I could smell the musty carpets in my own sweat. That evening, I flipped through the older photos again, the ones I'd taken from the trunk. I noticed that some people in the shots looked uneasy, even though they were smiling. One aunt had her hand on her shoulder like she felt something behind her. Another cousin was looking off to the side with a weird expression. Could they have felt it too? I turned on every light in the room because I felt on edge, like something might be just out of my sight. I kept checking over my shoulder. Every time the floor creaked, I jumped. My uncle was downstairs, clueless. He was probably cooking or watching TV. I didn't tell him how freaked out I was because I didn't think he'd believe me. He'd just laugh it off or say I was being paranoid. That night, I barely slept. The air felt thick. I kept thinking about that figure. When I finally dozed off, I had unsettling dreams that involved dark corners and shifting shapes. I woke up every couple of hours, sweating and breathing fast. I didn't want to take another photo, but I felt compelled to. I needed to see if the shadows changed again. So early the next morning, I decided to go outside. I walked around the house to the backyard. The sun was bright, and there were no large trees or fences close enough to cast weird shadows. I lifted the Polaroid, aimed it at the back door, and took one shot. I waited until it developed. My stomach churned when I saw it. The shape was bigger now, almost like it was standing a few feet away from me. I took another shot. This time, I tried to include myself by flipping the camera around and taking a selfie. The background showed the yard, a small shed, and part of the house. And there it was, a silhouette that looked almost solid. It was behind me, slightly to my left, like it was watching me. My mouth went dry. I dropped the photo in the grass. My hands shook so badly that I had to bend down slowly to pick it up. I went back inside, locked the door, and went straight to my room. I piled all the photographs on my desk and looked at them in sequence. The earliest photos from years ago showed faint smudges. Over time, they got darker. In the most recent ones, the shape was almost lifelike. I couldn't see any facial features, but the outline was unmistakable. It looked human in form, but it was like a black void. I felt a knot in my throat. I rubbed my eyes and took a few deep breaths. My heart felt like it was pounding in my ears. I decided I had to stop taking pictures. I considered throwing the camera away, but a part of me wanted answers. I thought maybe I could find some information about odd Polaroid phenomena. I searched online for stories about cameras capturing unseen shadows. I read a few forum posts. Some people claimed they had weird experiences, but nothing sounded exactly like what I was dealing with. My eyes felt dry from staring at the screen. My back ached from tension. I kept glancing at the door, half expecting to see that shape in real life, but it never appeared in normal vision. It was only in the photos. By late afternoon, I was exhausted, but I couldn't sleep. I could barely eat. My stomach was too twisted in knots. Every time I thought about the next photo, I got a fluttering feeling in my gut. I told myself not to do it, but around sunset, I finally broke down. I grabbed the camera and pointed it at the hallway outside my room. I took one picture. As the image appeared, I felt like I was holding my breath. When the chemicals finished developing, I saw a tall, dark outline in the hallway, turned slightly in my direction. My legs felt weak. I sat on the floor, leaning against the wall. The hallway was empty in real life, but the photograph showed otherwise. The shape looked closer than ever. I noticed a prickling sensation on my arms, and I realized I was shivering even though it wasn't cold. I stared at that picture for a few minutes, trying to steady my breathing. My thoughts were racing, but they were simple thoughts. This is so messed up. What am I supposed to do? I felt alone with this. I set the photo down and crawled onto my bed. The spring squeaked, and I lay there staring at the ceiling. I could hear the distant hum of my uncle's TV downstairs. I swallowed hard. My throat felt dry. Eventually, I sat up, packed the camera and all the photos into a bag, and zipped it shut. I didn't know where I would store it or what I'd do with it, but I didn't want it lying around in plain sight. I had this overpowering sense that I needed to distance myself from it. My hands trembled as I sealed the bag. I walked downstairs. My uncle was dozing off in his recliner. I could see the TV flickering. I told him I was heading out for a while, maybe to clear my head. He didn't look away from the TV, just nodded. I left the house, went to my car, and placed the bag in the trunk. I locked it. Then I just sat in the driver's seat with the engine off, thinking about nothing and everything at the same time. I felt a tightness in my chest. My pulse throbbed in my neck. I checked the rearview mirror, half expecting to see a shape behind me. Of course, there was nothing. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was around me somehow. I stayed in the car until the streetlights came on. After a while, I turned on the ignition and drove. I didn't know where I was going. I just needed to move, to get away from that house, that camera, those photos. My thoughts were jumbled, and my shoulders ached from tension. My jaw hurt because I had been clenching my teeth. I drove for maybe half an hour, then pulled into an empty parking lot. I stared at the passing headlights on the street. I thought about tossing the camera in a dumpster or leaving it by the side of the road, but a weird sense of responsibility stopped me. I didn't want someone else to pick it up and start seeing those shapes. I felt stuck. Eventually, I decided to head back. My uncle was still in the recliner, snoring lightly. I went upstairs, shut my bedroom door, and sat on the bed. I thought about what I'd seen, the constant presence of that shape in every photo, the way it was always closer to the subject over time. I couldn't prove anything, but I knew what I saw. The shadows in those old family photos weren't random. That shape was always there, lingering at the edges. Now that I had started taking new pictures, it seemed to grow bolder, more defined. I had no idea what it wanted or why it was showing up, but I knew it was real, at least in some sense. I'm still not sure what to do next. I'm not taking any more pictures. I don't plan to look at the old ones again. Right now, the camera is locked away where I can't see it. I can't shake the feeling that the shadows are still around, whether I photograph them or not. But I'm trying to put it out of my mind. I can't ignore what's there in black and white, though. Every time I close my eyes, I see that silhouette. It's right behind me, just out of reach, waiting for me to take another photo. And I won't. I don't think I can handle seeing it any clearer than I already have. So that's my story. I found an old Polaroid. I took some pictures, and now I know there's something lurking in those images, something that's been around my family for a long time. It's enough to keep me from ever snapping another shot again. I noticed something was off the first night I moved my boxes into the basement. The concrete walls felt too solid, and I saw faint lines in one corner that looked like they had been sealed with fresh plaster. I had no reason to suspect anything dangerous at first. I assumed it was just a patch job from some past repair. I turned on the overhead light, set down a few boxes, and thought I caught a reflection from behind a shelf. When I pulled the shelf away, I saw a narrow window frame that had been painted over, almost like someone tried to hide it. It didn't make any sense. This side of the basement faced the backyard, but I knew the ground outside was solid cement. I scratched at the paint with a pocket knife and felt an odd bump around the edges. The glass beneath the paint felt firm, and it made a low creaking sound if I pressed on it. There was no reason for a window to be there. It should have opened onto nothing but dirt and concrete. I felt uneasy, but I told myself it was just an old house with strange quirks. That night, I woke up to a rhythmic tapping sound. I had no idea where it was coming from. I checked my bedroom. Nothing was out of place. The tapping kept going, so I walked down the hall, then downstairs, and ended up in the kitchen. The noise got louder when I headed for the basement door. My stomach felt tight. I reached for the light switch next to the basement steps. The overhead bulb flickered, but it stayed on long enough for me to see the bottom of the steps. The tapping stopped as soon as I reached the basement floor. I scanned the area. It was cramped, and I could smell the musty odor of old boxes and damp concrete. My heart was beating fast. I heard a small click coming from the corner with the sealed window. I stared at it, waiting for some explanation in my head. Then I noticed a dim glow around the edges of the frame. I hadn't left any lights on. The overhead bulb had a dull yellow glow, but this was different. It had a white, flickering hue. It was like a tiny flashlight shining from behind the paint. I walked up to the frame and leaned in. The glow faded. For a second I figured maybe I was imagining it. Then it flickered again, as if someone on the other side was switching it on and off. My breath caught in my chest. I stood there for at least a full minute, not moving. The tapping was gone, but my mind raced. I tried to peel more of the paint away, but the window didn't open. It was sealed shut around all the edges. When I pressed my ear to the glass, I didn't hear anything. The window felt cold, like a refrigerated surface, but the temperature in the basement wasn't that low. I went back upstairs, feeling unsettled. I locked the basement door. I tried to convince myself it was an electrical quirk, maybe some reflection off a neighbor's light, though that made no sense with the window's location. Still, I went to bed. The next day, I took a closer look at the outside wall. The part of the yard where the window should have opened was covered by a thick concrete foundation. There was no sign of any cutout or old window well. It was a solid gray expanse. I knocked on the surface. It sounded dense. There was nowhere a window could fit behind that. I shook my head, turned around, and decided I would ignore it for now. I had things to do, and the idea of a hidden window felt like a strange bonus quirk of an older house. That evening, I was reading in the living room when I heard a metallic clatter from below. It sounded like someone slammed a metal object on concrete. I put down my book and stared at the floor. I wondered if a pipe had burst or if some tool fell off a shelf. I wasn't even sure I had any metal tools down there yet. My hands felt unsteady as I opened the basement door. I flipped the switch and the light stayed on this time. As I walked down, I heard something scrape across the floor. I took slow steps, trying not to make noise. I felt short of breath. When I turned the corner, I saw the sealed window. A faint glow pulsed behind it, like a slow heartbeat. Every pulse lit up the edges of the frame, then faded. It made the basement look more cramped. My skin prickled. I walked over and stared at the glass. The paint was chipped around most of the edges now, and I could see more of the window's surface. It was dirty and had streaks from the inside, almost as if something had wiped at it. I tapped on the glass with a finger. The pulse of light stopped for a second, and the scraping noise came again from behind the window. I leaned closer. Something moved on the other side. I didn't see it clearly, but I felt motion like a shape shifting in the darkness. I jumped back, startled. My heart pounded. I steadied myself by breathing slowly. My mind raced with questions. What could be on the other side? The outside was just concrete. I noticed my hands were shaking. I walked to my workbench and picked up a small screwdriver. I tried to pry the frame away from the wall, but it wouldn't budge. I ran the tip of the screwdriver around the seam. The wood was old but firm. I felt a cold draft against my fingers. It didn't make sense. The basement wasn't freezing. That cold breeze had to come from somewhere. I stepped back, rubbed my eyes, and decided to leave the basement. My nerves were shot. Before I left, I took one last look at the window. It stayed dark, but I sensed something behind it. For the next few nights, I heard random noises. Clicking, tapping, low scraping sounds. They never lasted long, but they always started late, around midnight. My appetite disappeared and I had trouble sleeping. My head felt heavy from the lack of rest. I tried ignoring the sounds, but they got louder, like something was drawing me down there on purpose. When I finally gave in, I found the window glowing each time. It was getting clearer. More paint had chipped off, or maybe the paint was thinning on its own. I saw shapes behind the glass, but I couldn't describe them. They looked like twisted shadows. Sometimes the light blinked in short bursts, making the shadows jump. Other times the light stayed steady, revealing outlines that looked too large to be reflections of anything in my basement. One night, I grabbed a flashlight and decided to record what I saw with my phone. I walked down the stairs, phone in hand, flashlight in the other. I kept the overhead light off to see if the glow would show up better. As soon as I reached the bottom, the glow flickered once and went out. I turned on my flashlight and aimed it at the window. The glass was almost fully revealed now. The paint had peeled away so much that I could see clear spots. Through one of those spots, I saw a faint image of a wooded area. Tall trees, some kind of clearing. It didn't look like my backyard. My backyard has a few bushes and a short fence. Nothing like a forest. My skin felt clammy. I tried to steady my phone camera on the spot, but all I got was a dim reflection. I saw my own face in the glass, pale and tense. When I turned off the flashlight, the glow flared back to life, but my phone's camera still didn't pick it up clearly. There was only a faint glare on the screen. I felt a sudden headache, like a pressure behind my eyes. I left the basement after a few minutes, my heart thudding the whole time. A few days later, I was lying in bed, half asleep, when a loud thump woke me. It felt like it came from the wall beneath me. My bedroom is directly over the basement corner, where the window is. I sat up, heart pounding, and listened. Another thump, followed by a scraping sound, reached my ears. I got out of bed, threw on some sweatpants, and forced myself to walk down there again. I was tired of feeling like a prisoner in my own house. My legs were shaky. The air in the basement felt stale and cold. My nose twitched. I could almost taste the damp concrete. The overhead light flickered a little, then went steady. I approached the window. I could see almost everything through it. The glass had become much cleaner, or maybe something on the other side was wiping it. My eyes focused on the strange scenery. It looked like a different place entirely, a wide open space. The thumping sound resumed, and I realized it was coming from behind the glass. Something was hitting it, testing its strength. I pressed my ear to the window. I could hear a faint rustling noise, like branches swaying. Then I heard a dull scrape, like claws on wood or maybe nails on glass. My mouth felt dry. I backed away, never taking my eyes off the pane. That was the first time I realized something was trying to get in. I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. My mind was spinning with fear. My chest felt tight and a cold sweat beaded on my forehead. I stepped back to the stairs, half expecting the window to burst open. It didn't. The tapping died away, replaced by a steady glow. I turned off the overhead light. In the darkness, the glow was strong enough to light up the entire corner. I could see the reflection of the rest of the basement in the glass. My storage boxes, my tool bench, my old chair. Everything looked normal except for that bright, shifting window. Over the next week, I tried to focus on other things. I went to work. I came home. I ate dinner. But every night I heard noises. They were getting louder and more violent. Sometimes it sounded like the window was about to crack. I dreaded going down there. My nerves were on edge. My body felt weak from the constant anxiety. I jumped at every small noise. I tried turning up the TV, wearing headphones, anything to distract myself. But around the same time each night, that distant tapping or scraping pulled me back. One night, I stayed away. I locked my bedroom door and tried to ignore the sounds, but they got so loud I couldn't sleep. Around 2 a.m, I decided to face it again. I took a crowbar this time. I don't know what I expected to do with it. I guess I just wanted to feel safer. My hands were sweaty on the metal. The basement smelled damp and stale. I flicked on the light and stared at the window. It was fully clear now, no trace of paint. The frame looked like it had expanded or changed, because I could see details in whatever world was on the other side. I saw tall, thin trees in the distance. The sky looked darker than night, but it wasn't black. It had an unsettling gray shade, almost colorless. I blinked, trying to focus. Then something shifted near the glass. It pressed against it from the other side, making the pane bulge outward a fraction. The window flexed like a thin plastic sheet, then snapped back. My arms went cold. I tightened my grip on the crowbar. A soft tapping started, then turned into a continuous scratch. I forced myself to get closer. My reflection overlapped with the shape in the window. It was hard to see details, but I sensed it was tall. It had a shape like a person, but the proportions seemed off. It turned its head, or what I assumed was a head, toward me. I couldn't see eyes, but I felt watched. My heart hammered. My thoughts were racing. I wanted to shut my eyes, but I kept them open. The thing lifted an arm, and I saw a faint outline of long fingers or maybe elongated claws. It tapped on the glass, making a hollow rhythmic sound. My stomach churned. I found myself backing away, but I couldn't look away. The glow brightened, lighting up the basement in a harsh white glare. I raised the crowbar, unsure of what to do. The shape kept tapping and pushing. The glass squeaked. I thought about swinging the crowbar, but I was afraid to break the window. What if smashing it let that thing in? My chest tightened. My breathing was fast and shallow. My ears rang. I felt dizzy. I tried to think logically, but my mind was blank. The tapping became pounding. The entire frame rattled. It sounded like it was ready to crack. My arms shook. I stumbled back toward the stairs, crowbar still in hand. The pounding stopped the second I reached the first step. I heard a deep, vibrating sound, almost like a growl. Then the light behind the window shut off, leaving me in near darkness. The overhead bulb flickered again and went out. I scrambled up the stairs, slammed the door shut behind me, and locked it. For the next few hours, I sat in my living room, lights on, crowbar at my side. I stared at the basement door. My heart wouldn't settle. My stomach felt queasy. I kept expecting to hear wood splintering or glass shattering, but everything stayed quiet. Around dawn, I forced myself to check the basement again. I opened the door slowly. The overhead light came on like normal. Nothing seemed disturbed. No broken glass. No cracks in the frame. The window was still there, but it looked darker. I stepped closer. The glow was gone. I saw only my reflection in the dusty glass. My eyes looked sunken from lack of sleep. I tapped the window gently, half expecting it to react. Nothing happened. I leaned in, trying to see that strange landscape. It was gone. I only saw the faint shape of my basement reflected back at me. I walked outside to the backyard, searching for any cracks or openings in the foundation. It looked normal. The wall was solid, no sign of damage. I felt a wave of relief, but it was mixed with confusion. The night before was real. I heard those sounds. I saw that shape. I decided to cover the window permanently. I dragged a heavy cabinet from the garage and placed it in front of the frame in the basement. It blocked everything, at least from my sight. I thought maybe if I ignored it, it would go away. I tried to sleep in my bedroom again. I kept the basement door locked. I still hear tapping at night, though it's quieter now. It doesn't last as long, and sometimes I can barely tell if it's real or my imagination. But I know it's still there, behind that window, pressing closer each night. I feel the vibrations in the walls. The cabinet seems to shift an inch or two each morning, as if something pushes from inside. I haven't had the courage to move it again. I can't forget the sight of that tall shape, or the eerie glow behind the glass. I can't ignore the feeling that something is still trying to cross over. When I walk past the basement door, I pause and listen. Sometimes I hear nothing. Other times I hear a faint scratching. My body tenses. My mouth goes dry. I keep walking, pretending I don't notice. That's where I am now, living day by day, trying to keep it out of my thoughts. But deep down, I know the window is still there, hidden behind the cabinet, sealed into the foundation where it doesn't belong. I don't know how long the seal will hold. I don't know how it appeared or what's on the other side, waiting for another chance to break through. Every night I brace myself for the next round of tapping and scraping, and every morning I wake up relieved that nothing has shattered. At least not yet. But I can't shake the feeling that the next time it glows, that thing might finally find a way in. And if it does, I'll be here, crowbar in hand, hoping I'm strong enough to keep it out. I still remember the exact moment I saw that figure for the first time. It was almost midnight, and I was driving on an empty stretch of highway. The sky was clear, but the darkness around me felt heavy. My hands were tight on the steering wheel, and the only sounds I heard were the hum of the car engine and the faint rush of wind against the windows. Then, out of nowhere, I noticed movement near the row of streetlights lining the roadside. Something pale darted across my field of vision. I hit the brakes so hard my seatbelt dug into my collarbone. When I looked again, I saw nothing but flickering light and the long asphalt road ahead. I stepped out, hoping to find a person or maybe a stray animal, but the silence outside felt thicker than the darkness. No footprints, no rustling in the bushes, no sound of another car. Just me, my car, and the faint buzzing of the streetlights. I stood there for a minute, my pulse thudding in my ears. Then I got back in, shook off my nerves, and drove away. But I couldn't stop replaying that moment in my head. The next day I tried to brush it off. I told myself it could have been exhaustion or my eyes playing tricks. I went about my morning routine, ate a quick breakfast, and tried to stay busy. But that night I decided to drive the same route again. I claimed it was a shortcut, though I knew it wasn't. I just wanted to confirm I hadn't imagined the whole thing. I felt a knot in my stomach as I passed the same stretch of highway. My eyes flicked from one streetlight to the next, waiting to see that shape. And then it happened again. This time the figure appeared a bit closer. It moved fast, almost gliding from one pool of light to the next. It was translucent, or at least partially see-through. It had the outline of a person, but I couldn't make out any details. No face, no clothes, just a shape. It vanished as soon as I slowed down. I pulled over and grabbed my phone. I opened the camera and pointed it at the place where I'd seen the figure. The phone's screen showed nothing but darkness and the slight glow from the streetlights. My heart pounded, and my mouth went dry. I walked up and down the side of the road, hoping to catch any sign of a presence, footprints, a breeze, something. I heard my own breathing. The longer I stood there, the more I felt like I was being watched, even though I couldn't see anyone. After a while, I gave up and drove home, my head buzzing with the memory of that shape. I couldn't get rid of the image. That was when my obsession started. I told myself I needed proof. I planned to record everything the next time it appeared. So the following evening, I set up a small camera on my dashboard and used my phone to take notes. I spoke into the phone, describing the route, the time, and what I expected to see. My voice sounded shaky, even to me. I stayed vigilant, scanning every shadow and every flicker of light. But that night, nothing showed up. I drove all the way to the next town and back. Not a single sign of the figure. I reviewed the footage later, and it was just me cursing under my breath whenever I hit a pothole. I tried again the next night. Same gear, same plan, same lack of results. The figure didn't appear at all. 3 more nights went by with no sign. I started doubting myself. Maybe I really had imagined it. Maybe I was under too much stress. But on the 5th night, I left the camera rolling as usual. I kept my eyes on the road, and suddenly, there it was again. That faint shape, slipping between 2 lampposts. My heart kicked into overdrive. I eased my foot off the accelerator and glanced at the camera screen, but nothing appeared there. All I saw on the live feed was the road and the lights. I looked back at the road itself, and the figure was still there, closer than before. It was like it was watching me. As soon as I parked the car and reached for my phone, it vanished. I replayed the recorded footage and saw absolutely nothing unusual. No flicker, no blur, no sign of anything. I couldn't let it go. I had to figure out what was happening. I started keeping an audio diary. Whenever I drove at night, I'd record my voice describing what I saw. I'd say things like, "It just appeared near the 5th streetlight from the turnoff," or "It moved to the other side of the road in a split second." But whenever I tried to switch to video, the figure never showed up in real time or on playback. It was driving me crazy. My sleep schedule got messed up because I kept thinking about it. During the day, I'd go back to that spot, but everything looked normal under the sun. Just a dull highway, a few weeds near the edge of the pavement, and some cracked asphalt. Nothing out of the ordinary. I kept going back night after night. Each time the figure got a little bolder, showing itself for an extra moment or stepping a bit further into the road before disappearing. I started to wonder if it was trying to lure me out of the car. Sometimes I would park and walk around, checking the ditches and the area behind the guardrails. I'd call out, "Hello? Is anyone there?" My heart would pound and the hair on my neck would stand on end. But I never got an answer. I touched the cold metal of the guardrail, feeling my palms sweat as I gripped it. The wind occasionally kicked up dust, and every time it did, I'd tense up, thinking something was about to appear behind me. After a few weeks of this, I began to feel like I was losing my mind. I told a friend about it, and he laughed it off. He said I should lay off caffeine and stop driving so late. I tried explaining the details, but the more I talked, the more I felt like a raving lunatic. Eventually, I stopped mentioning it to people. I just kept my notes and audio logs to myself. I listened back to them, hoping for clues. I'd hear my own shaky breathing or the hum of the engine, but the figure never made a sound. One night, I decided to bring better equipment. I borrowed a high-end camera from a coworker who used it for filming local events. I didn't give him the full story, just said I wanted to record some nighttime scenery. He handed it over with minimal questions, so I mounted it on the passenger seat with a tripod, set to record continuously. I also used a separate audio recorder I'd picked up from a pawn shop. I felt prepared. I told myself that this time, I'd catch the figure on video, no matter what. I even placed a couple of external battery lights outside the car when I parked, hoping they'd illuminate the area better. That night, I saw the figure 3 separate times. The first time was around the same spot it usually appeared, near a cluster of lampposts. I slowed down, stared directly at it, and felt my skin prickle. My chest got tight, and I could hardly breathe. Yet when I glanced at the camera's screen, there was just the empty road. It was so frustrating I nearly punched the dashboard. The second time it appeared a few minutes later, darting across the street a few car lengths ahead of me. I swerved, my tires squealing on the asphalt. I slammed on the brakes and felt my heart hammering. Again, I checked the camera. Nothing. The third time I was parked and scanning the area on foot. I felt something behind me. I spun around and there it was, about 10 feet away, standing near a flickering lamppost. I could see its outline clearly. I reached for my phone, but as soon as I turned the camera on, the lamppost stopped flickering and the figure vanished. My breath was coming in shallow gasps, and my hands shook. I reviewed my high-end camera footage later. It showed nothing but me talking to the air, shining my flashlight around. At that point, I was deep into this mystery. I couldn't stop. It was like an itch in my brain that wouldn't go away. I started sleeping in the afternoon so I could be out there at night. My back seat was piled with extra flashlights, batteries, cables, and memory cards. I kept telling myself maybe I needed a second set of eyes, but I was also scared to bring anyone else along. What if they thought I was crazy? Or worse, what if they saw nothing at all and confirmed I was imagining everything? The figure showed up more frequently as time went on. Sometimes I could barely catch a glimpse of it before it disappeared. Other times it stayed long enough for me to blink and wonder if it was real. It was always silent. It never touched me or spoke, but it felt aware. It felt like it was studying me. I started to sweat even in the cool night air. My stomach cramped up and I'd get sudden headaches. I kept telling myself I wasn't scared, I was just anxious. But inside I knew I was terrified. I didn't know if it was a ghost or some kind of weird light reflection, but it felt real enough to make my hands tremble every time I turned onto that stretch of highway. My life outside of this routine started falling apart. I was late to work. I missed social events. My apartment became a mess of half-eaten food and camera gear. I'd wake up every afternoon feeling disoriented, and the first thing I'd think of was that shape. I wanted answers. I tried researching local legends but found nothing relevant. I checked old newspaper archives but only saw stories about accidents on different parts of the highway. None of them matched my exact location, and I wasn't finding any mention of an apparition. It was just me and my obsession. One night I arrived earlier than usual, right after dusk. I parked in a small gravel turnout near the cluster of streetlights and set up a few cameras. I positioned them at different angles, hoping that if the figure showed up behind me, at least one lens would catch it. I had a handheld camera ready too. Then I sat in my car and waited. The night was silent except for the distant sound of insects. My hands were clammy. My neck felt stiff because I kept twisting around to check all the spots outside my windows. After almost 2 hours, I got out. I walked along the edge of the road, shining my flashlight in a slow arc. My heart pounded with every step. When the figure finally appeared, it was closer than ever. I froze. It stood maybe 6 feet away from me, just off to the right of a flickering lamp. The shape had no features, but I could see it more clearly than before. It was as tall as an adult, and I sensed it was watching me. My throat felt tight and my skin crawled. I lifted my handheld camera, pressing the record button. But at that exact moment, the figure faded. I stared at the empty space, my flashlight beam slicing through the darkness. I looked at my camera's display. It showed nothing but grainy footage of the lamppost and the gravel on the ground. I felt a rush of frustration so strong I nearly threw the camera down. I wanted to scream. For the next hour, I searched the whole area on foot. I circled back to the car several times to check my other camera feeds. All of them just recorded me wandering around, sometimes shining my light into the lens by accident. No sign of the figure. I felt like a fool, stumbling around in the dark, chasing something that refused to be captured. My palms hurt because I'd been gripping my flashlight too hard. I made the drive home that night feeling drained. My chest felt hollow and I was shaky from the adrenaline. The next day, I called in sick to work. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the night's events in my mind. I knew I'd have to go back. It wasn't even a question. I needed a breakthrough, proof that I wasn't hallucinating. In some twisted way, I wanted confirmation that this thing existed. That evening, I packed an overnight bag, deciding I'd stay out on that stretch of road as long as it took. I arrived around 9 p.m. The highway was empty except for the occasional car passing by in the distance. I set up 2 cameras on tripods, one facing the road, the other angled toward the fields behind the guardrails. I turned on the wide-angle setting so I could cover more ground. I also wore a small body camera clipped to my jacket, hoping that if the figure came close, maybe the lens would catch something. I walked up and down for a while, stepping carefully on the gravel. The air was still. I could feel my heart thudding every time I saw a shadow move. Midnight came and went. I was tired and my feet ached, but I forced myself to stay alert. Around 2 a.m., I saw the figure again, running between 2 streetlights farther down the highway. My chest tightened. I broke into a jog, trying to follow it. The figure vanished, and I almost tripped on a pothole. When I got to the spot, there was nothing. I checked my body cam. All I saw was my shaky footage of the ground as I ran. I cursed under my breath, fighting back the urge to throw my equipment. A wave of anger and confusion swept over me. I felt tears in my eyes, but I blinked them away. I refused to leave. I stood there, panting, scanning the darkness. That's how it's been ever since. I still can't prove that what I'm seeing is real. Part of me wonders if I'm going insane, chasing shadows on a lonely highway. Another part of me thinks maybe this thing is toying with me, appearing only when I can't record it. My eyes itch from lack of sleep. My back hurts from all the nights spent in my car. But I keep coming here night after night, camera in hand, telling myself that eventually I'll catch it on tape or figure out its purpose. Every time I stand on that stretch of road, I feel a rush of cold air at my back, like someone stepped too close. I spin around, expecting to see the figure. Sometimes I do, just for a heartbeat. Other times, it never shows itself at all. I'm trapped in this cycle of anticipation and disappointment. But I can't seem to walk away. I can't ignore the memory of that translucent shape gliding between the streetlights. beckoning me further into the darkness. And so I keep coming back, hoping that one night I'll find a way to break this spell. Until then, I'll be here on this lonely road, chasing a silent shape that refuses to be recorded, wondering if it's real or if I'm just losing my mind. I walked into that hotel with my mind set on the next day's business meeting. I didn't care about local gossip or old rumors. All I wanted was a bed, a desk, and a reliable Wi-Fi connection. But the desk clerk stared at me with a concerned look and said, "We only have one room left. It's room 213. I shrugged. I'd stayed in plenty of old hotels, and the big chandelier in the lobby looked secure enough. I signed the papers, grabbed my key, and headed toward the elevator without thinking twice. That was my first mistake. When I stepped off the elevator, the hallway felt colder than the lobby. The lights on the ceiling gave off a yellow glow, and parts of the corridor were dim. I saw old wallpaper peeling near the baseboards. The floor creaked under my shoes. My room was at the end, which made sense since 213 was the last number on that floor. I heard a faint hum from the overhead lights, and I could smell something dusty, like stale air mixed with cleaning fluid. I passed a couple of doors that looked warped with age. Their metal number plates were scratched and tarnished. It felt deserted, and I thought maybe everyone else was asleep. It was already after 11 p.m. When I reached my door, I noticed the brass numbers 213 were loose, and the 3 was slightly crooked. I paused for a second, then unlocked the door and walked in. The room was bigger than I expected. The bed had a thick blanket with a floral pattern, and there was a heavy wooden dresser against the wall. The carpet had dark stains near the corners. The air felt stale, like nobody had opened a window in a while. I flicked on the overhead light, and it buzzed for a few seconds before it settled. The walls had an old-fashioned floral print that matched the bedspread. There was a single window with thick curtains. I saw a little desk and a wooden chair. The bathroom was immediately to my right, with an old porcelain sink and a yellowish bathtub. I noticed the mirror had a couple of cracks running through the edge. I set my suitcase on the bed and tried to settle in. I was tired from my flight, so I didn't plan on staying awake for long. I checked the Wi-Fi on my phone. The signal was weak, but workable. I sat on the bed and pulled out my laptop. While I waited for some emails to load, I heard a faint thumping noise above me, like someone dropping something on the floor above. I frowned. There wasn't a floor above me, though. I was on the top floor. I tapped my foot on the carpet and listened. The noise came in short bursts, then stopped. I told myself it could be the pipes or some old building quirk. I tried to ignore it and focused on my email. I typed a few short messages to coworkers confirming the next morning's schedule. Then I scrolled through some updates and realized I wasn't concentrating. That soft thumping continued, almost like footsteps. It seemed to move back and forth. At one point, I almost swore I heard a muffled scrape, like a chair being dragged across the floor. I set my laptop aside and stood up. The room was quiet except for that strange movement above me. I walked to the window and peeked outside. The parking lot was mostly empty. There were a few lights, but nothing was happening out there. I decided I was too tired to care. I told myself old buildings make random noises. I turned off my laptop, changed into a t-shirt and sweatpants, and went to use the bathroom. The bathroom light flickered before staying on. I splashed water on my face and noticed how cold it was. The pipes made a groaning sound when I turned the faucet handle. I shrugged it off. I shut off the bathroom light, stepped out, and then heard a creak behind me. The door slowly moved on its own, closing halfway. I felt a small chill run down my arms. I reached out and pulled the door open again, then let it rest in its original position. It stayed put. I got into bed and turned off the main light. A dim lamp on the nightstand cast long shadows across the floor. I tucked myself in and tried to sleep. The footsteps above me died down after a while, or maybe I just got used to them. My eyes grew heavy. Sometime later, I jolted awake. I wasn't sure how long I'd slept. I fumbled for my phone and saw it was almost 2 a.m. My heart pounded in my chest, and I wasn't sure why. Then I noticed the bathroom light was on. I was certain I had turned it off. I pushed the blankets off and got out of bed. The floor felt cold. I walked to the bathroom door and found it closed. I tried the handle, which turned easily, but the door felt heavier than before. Once I pushed it open, I saw the faucet running at full blast. Water splashed against the sink basin and dripped onto the floor. The mirror was fogged up, and the entire room felt damp. I reached over and turned off the faucet. My hands shook a bit. I stood there, staring at the sink. I didn't see any reason for it to turn on by itself. I wiped the water off the edges of the sink. Then I noticed the light switch was indeed in the on position. I flipped it off and walked back into the room, checking every corner. I opened the closet. It was empty except for some extra pillows. I checked behind the heavy drapes and saw only dusty glass. The window was locked. My suitcase was still on the bed, undisturbed. Nothing else looked out of place. My pulse was still high, and my breathing was uneven. I told myself maybe I had left the faucet dripping and forgot. I tried to calm down. I got back into bed and put my phone on the nightstand. My mind kept replaying the image of the faucet running full blast. A slow, sinking feeling told me that wasn't normal, but I needed rest. I eventually dozed off again. Around 4 a.m., I woke up with a jolt. This time I heard a loud bang. I shot upright. The room was dark except for that small nightstand lamp. My mouth felt dry, and my skin prickled with sweat. I listened. A creak came from near the bathroom door. I realized the door was now wide open and the light inside was off. I quietly swung my legs over the side of the bed and stood up. My legs felt unsteady. I took a few steps toward the bathroom, but there was only silence. No dripping faucet, no footsteps overhead. I stood there for a moment, feeling my heartbeat in my ears. Then I heard another thump in the corridor. I thought maybe someone was out there. I rushed to the door and looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty. I pressed my ear against the door but heard no voices, no movement. I stepped back and shut off the lamp. The darkness pressed in, and I regretted turning off that light. After a moment, I flicked it back on. I didn't want to stand in a pitch-black room. I barely slept the rest of the night. At some point, I fell asleep sitting up. When morning came, I woke with a stiff neck. I checked the bathroom. It was dry. No lights were on. The mirror had those same cracks along the edge. My reflection looked haggard. I brushed my teeth, got dressed in my business suit, and prepared to leave the room. Before I stepped into the hallway, I had a sudden thought. What if I just checked out now? But my meeting was at 9 a.m., and I had nowhere else booked. It was also a hassle to find another hotel with availability on short notice in this old town. I decided to suck it up. I left the room and closed the door behind me. Downstairs, the morning shift clerk was a different person. She asked if everything was okay. I forced a smile and said it was fine. I grabbed a quick coffee and a muffin from the lobby breakfast area. As I was about to leave, I overheard a conversation between two guests. They were whispering about room 213 and how it was known for strange occurrences. I perked up and wandered closer, pretending to check my phone. One guest said he had stayed there years ago and heard what sounded like someone banging on the walls at night. The other said there were rumors about the room being haunted. I felt a knot form in my stomach. I decided I wouldn't share my story. I needed to keep a clear head for my meeting. I spent most of the day in a stuffy conference room across the street. My presentation went well, but I couldn't stop thinking about the weird events in that room. After the meeting ended, I debated finding another place to stay for the night. But my boss had prepaid for this hotel, and I didn't want to cause trouble. I figured I'd survive one more night. Still, I wanted answers. I talked to a few co-workers who were also staying in the same hotel. One man said he'd overheard staff talking about the room at the end of the hall, but he had no details. Another co-worker joked that maybe I should just stay out late so I'd be too tired to notice anything. I laughed uneasily. When I got back to the hotel around 7 p.m., the lobby lighting made the place feel more welcoming. There were guests milling around. and the staff seemed busy. I saw the same woman from the morning shift at the front desk. I walked up to her and asked, "Is there something about room 213 I need to know?" She hesitated, then shrugged. She said, "It's an older part of the building and some guests mention odd noises, but I don't have any official record of problems." Her tone was neutral, but she wouldn't meet my eyes. I felt a chill, but I just nodded and stepped away. Another staff member, who was stacking some towels behind the counter, glanced at me and then turned away quickly. I knew something was off. I took the elevator up to my floor. The corridor lights were dim again, and the stale smell was back. My door looked the same. I unlocked it and pushed it open, half expecting something out of place. The bed was made, the garbage had been emptied, and the window curtains were drawn. The old, musty smell hung in the air. I sighed, dropped my briefcase near the desk, and loosened my tie. My phone buzzed with a text from a coworker asking about dinner. I decided to meet him in the hotel's small lounge area. I spent about 2 hours downstairs, drinking a couple of beers and talking about work. When I mentioned the weird noises I'd heard, my coworker shrugged. He said, "This place is old, man. Maybe the floors just creak." I nodded and laughed, trying to brush it off. Still, a small part of me felt uneasy. Around 10 p.m., I walked back to my room. I considered just calling it a night. I was tired, and I planned to leave early in the morning. My flight was at noon, but I wanted to check out by 9 a.m. Inside the room, I flipped on the main light. It buzzed for a few seconds, then settled into a faint flicker. I turned on the TV for some background noise. There weren't many channels, so I left it on a local station. I sat at the desk and started typing up some notes on my laptop. About 30 minutes passed without incident. Then the overhead light started flickering more intensely. It made a quick zapping sound and then went dark. The TV screen faded into static for a second before returning to normal. I walked to the light switch and tried flipping it off and on. Nothing happened. The bulb had burned out. Great, I thought. Now I had to rely on the lamp by the bed, which gave off a weaker glow. I sat back down at the desk, relying on my laptop screen for more light. A few minutes later, I heard a shuffle behind me. It was a soft, scraping noise. I froze, my hands hovering over the keyboard. The TV volume was low and the lamp on the nightstand didn't brighten much of the room. I turned around slowly. The bathroom door was open, and the interior was dark, but I got the sense something was different. I stood up and took a few steps toward the bathroom. My pulse raced, and I felt a weird prickling sensation along my arms. When I reached the doorway, I flicked the bathroom switch. The light flickered. Then I heard a sudden rush of water. The faucet turned on by itself, blasting water into the sink. I stepped back, my heart hammering. The handle was twisting on its own, or at least it looked that way. I reached out and grabbed the handle. It felt ice cold, and I forced it down. The water stopped. I stood there breathing heavily. My shirt was damp from the splash. I took a step back into the main room. Then I heard a creaking sound directly overhead. It moved across the ceiling like someone pacing. A quick set of thumps followed, then a scraping noise. I clenched my fists and looked up, but I only saw the old ceiling. Dust floated in the faint light from the lamp. At that moment, I told myself I wasn't staying here another minute. I grabbed my suitcase, started throwing clothes inside, and zipped it shut. I packed my laptop. My hands were trembling, and I felt a knot in my stomach. I kept thinking about how there was no room above me. That was the top floor. Yet I kept hearing footsteps. I didn't want to see what else would happen in the middle of the night. As I reached for the doorknob twisted in my hand, almost like it was resisting. I yanked it and the door opened with a loud squeak. The hallway outside was dark. One light near the elevator flickered. I dragged my suitcase behind me and pressed the elevator button. The old metal doors took a moment to open. The corridor felt colder than before, and I heard a faint whisper of movement behind me. I glanced back at the door to room 213. It stood half open, like it was waiting. The overhead lights hummed, and my stomach churned. I stepped into the elevator as soon as the doors opened. Once inside, I jabbed the L button for the lobby. I wanted to be out of there. The elevator rattled on the way down. My mind replayed the faucet turning on and the footsteps above me. I told myself I'd stay in the lobby for the night if I had to. When I reached the lobby, the night clerk was dozing off at the front desk. I walked over and said, "I need to check out. Right now." The clerk gave me a puzzled look. He said, "Our system might not be able to process that until morning." I said, "I'll pay cash. I don't care. I'm not staying here another minute." He eyed me for a second, then started typing. It took a while for him to figure out the system. While he did that, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around, but nobody was there. The air felt thick, like a storm was coming. The clerk sighed and finally said, "You're good to go, but you won't get a refund for tonight." I didn't care. I slid my card over. He processed the payment. While I waited for the printer to spit out a receipt, I noticed a slight flicker in the lobby lights. The big chandelier above the front desk swayed. The desk clerk glanced up, then looked at me with a nervous expression. I grabbed my receipt and nodded a quick thanks. I left the building without looking back. Outside, the air felt chilly. I rolled my suitcase toward my car, which was parked in a dimly lit corner of the lot. My hands were shaking. I got in, slammed the door, and locked it. The engine started on the first try, and I backed out of the space. In my rearview mirror, I saw the tall silhouette of the hotel behind me. One of the windows at the top floor looked dark. I floored the gas, focusing on finding a motel or anywhere else I could sleep safely. I didn't care if it was a cheap roadside place without decent Wi-Fi. I just needed distance between me and that old building. I spent the rest of the night at a small chain motel off the highway. It wasn't fancy, but it felt normal. No flickering lights, no footsteps above me, no faucets turning on by themselves. I tried to relax, but my mind raced. I thought about how real those sounds and movements were. It wasn't my imagination. Something was off about that room, and I didn't want to know the details. I never told my coworkers what really happened. The next day, I hopped on my flight and got back home. But even now, when someone mentions an old hotel, my stomach tightens. I remember the flickering lights, the footsteps overhead, the bathroom door moving on its own, and that faucet blasting water for no reason. I remember how my heart pounded and how my hands shook. Room 213 was a place I never want to see again. That's all I can say. I checked out before sunrise and I have no regrets. I'd rather lose a night's room fee than spend another hour in that place. I inherited a painting last month from a distant uncle I barely knew. I didn't even realize he was still alive when the lawyer contacted me. I was surprised to get anything, let alone a painting. I remember standing in my living room, looking at the package. It was wrapped in layers of thick paper and bubble wrap. The lawyer had mentioned it was an old portrait. He didn't say much else. At first, I was just curious. Then I felt a bit uneasy. The package had a strange smell like a damp basement, but I ripped off the wrapping and pulled the painting out. It showed a figure shrouded in darkness, the face half hidden in shadows. I couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman. The shape was just there, staring forward, mouth curved in a slight smile. I put it on the table. I didn't hang it up right away because I wasn't sure if I even liked it. The next day, after work, I decided to take a closer look. The figure's eyes were barely visible. The edges of the painting looked worn. The frame had small scratches and a few missing bits of wood. I realized it might be old and valuable, so I thought about keeping it somewhere safe or maybe even getting it appraised. As I studied it, though, I felt an odd discomfort. It was like that hazy figure was looking directly at me, even though I couldn't see its full face. The hair on my arms stood up. I told myself I was just imagining it. I set the painting against the wall in my living room. I sat on my couch, turned on the TV, and tried to forget the whole thing. That night, I slept fine. But when I woke up in the morning, I went to get a glass of water from the kitchen. On my way, I glanced at the painting. The mouth seemed a bit wider. The corners of the lips looked more pronounced. I stood there for a few seconds, wondering if I was remembering it wrong. Maybe I hadn't studied it closely enough before. I tried to brush it off. I told myself I was probably mixing up the details, but I felt this tingle in my stomach like a slight twist of worry. Over the next few days, I couldn't ignore it. Every time I looked at the painting, I noticed a change. The smile seemed to be growing. It wasn't a huge grin, but the difference was enough to unnerve me. The figure's eyes also appeared brighter, like they were slowly coming out of the shadows. I started feeling anxious every time I passed by that corner of the room. I had a tightness in my chest. My palms got sweaty when I stood in front of it. I began to leave the lights on when I went to bed, just so I wouldn't wake up to a dark house with that thing watching me. After a week, I'd had enough. I turned the painting to face the wall. I felt a jolt of relief when I didn't see that figure's face anymore. But that night, around 3 in the morning, I woke up with my heart pounding. I was certain I heard a soft scraping sound. My ears were straining in the darkness. I got up, turned on the lamp, and walked into the living room. The painting was still facing the wall, but I felt that same oppressive presence. My breathing was shallow and my hands shook a little. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination. I went back to bed and stayed awake for hours, staring at the ceiling. The next morning, I took the painting and put it in a closet in the hallway. I placed it so the face was definitely covered by a spare blanket. Then I went to work. All day I felt uneasy. My stomach churned. I couldn't focus on my tasks. I kept thinking about the painting alone in my closet. I pictured it turned around somehow, the figure facing the door. I tried to push the thought away. When I got home, I hesitated before opening the closet. My heart thumped hard in my chest. After a moment, I gathered the courage and opened it. The painting was still in the same spot. The blanket was still over it. I felt a wave of relief, but something in me urged me to check underneath the blanket. I did, and that same smile was there. It felt even bigger than before. The corners of the mouth were slightly upturned, like the figure was about to speak. My pulse quickened. My hands tingled with pins and needles. I threw the blanket back over it and slammed the closet door shut. That night I couldn't sleep well. I kept thinking I heard footsteps outside my bedroom door, a faint shuffle like someone moving around. My body was covered in a cold sweat. My breathing was shallow. I tried to distract myself by reading on my phone, but my eyes kept drifting to the hallway door. Around 4 in the morning, I got out of bed and marched straight to the closet. I yanked the door open. The painting was out in plain sight, leaning against the wall. The blanket was off to the side, crumpled on the floor. I felt ice in my veins. I definitely remembered leaving the blanket over the painting. I definitely remembered pushing it into a corner. Yet there it was, face forward, like it wanted me to look at it. I didn't scream or anything. Instead, I stood there, heart hammering. My knees felt weak. My breath got stuck in my throat for a few seconds. Then on shaky legs, I grabbed the painting. I stared at the twisted smile. It looked wider than before. I could see the faint outline of teeth. I heard a faint ringing in my ears. I put the painting down the hallway, near the front door, and went back to bed. I didn't sleep at all. The next morning, I decided I was done. I wouldn't keep it. I went out to my garage, found a large cardboard box, and packed the painting inside. I taped it shut. I planned to drive it to a junkyard or a thrift store. I didn't care about its value anymore. I just wanted it out of my house. My hands were shaking as I taped the box, but I felt a little better knowing I was taking action. I got in my car and placed the box in the trunk. I drove around for a while looking for a donation center or somewhere that would accept large items. Eventually, I stopped at a place outside of town. They mostly took clothing and furniture, but I figured a painting might be okay too. The person there said they weren't accepting random art pieces unless I had some documentation. I said I didn't. They told me to check with another place across town. I felt this weird pressure in my chest. It was like the painting didn't want to be left behind. I tried another place and they said something similar. No one wanted an old portrait without any provenance or appraisal. I gave up and drove home. My head was pounding. I parked in the driveway. I was tempted to just toss it in the trash, but the garbage pickup wasn't for another few days. I figured if I left it outside, maybe someone would take it. So I placed the box next to my driveway. Then I went inside. I tried to keep my mind off of it by washing dishes and cleaning my living room. I avoided looking at the spot where the painting used to stand. A few hours later, I heard a rustling sound outside. I looked through the window. The box had fallen over, the tape was peeled back, and I saw part of the frame sticking out. The wind didn't seem strong enough to do that, but I tried not to dwell on it. I opened the door and stared at that box for a minute. Then, feeling tense, I walked outside, closed it up again with fresh tape, and left it there. Night came. I felt jumpy and on edge. Every little noise in the house made me flinch. I tried to watch a movie to distract myself, but my mind kept drifting to that box outside. Eventually, I decided to check. It was around midnight. I opened the door, stepped onto my porch, and looked at the driveway. The box was gone. There was no sign of it anywhere. I felt a rush of relief. I actually smiled. I thought maybe someone took it, maybe some trash picker or a curious passerby. I went back inside and locked the door. I slept better that night. The next day, I woke up feeling lighter. I got ready for work, made coffee, and left. Nothing seemed out of place. I almost forgot about the painting by the time I got off work. But when I came home, I noticed something strange. My front door was slightly open, just a crack. I was sure I'd locked it. My heart hammered. I walked inside, flicking the lights on. My entire body tensed. There was the same box sitting in my living room, taped up. The floor around it had small scratches, like someone dragged it inside. I could barely breathe. My mouth felt dry. My hands shook as I set my keys on the counter. I knelt down and pulled on the tape. It came loose with a sharp sound. The painting was right there. The figure was clearly visible. The smile looked bigger than before. The shadows around the face seemed lighter, revealing more details. The hair hung close to the forehead. The eyes looked more defined. I almost dropped the painting. I could feel my heartbeat in my ears. I smelled that musty odor again, like stale air in an old cellar. I put the painting back in the box and sealed it shut, pressing the tape down with all my strength. I called a friend and told him I had something weird in my house. I didn't go into detail. I just said I needed help moving it somewhere else. He said he could come by in a few days, but he was busy right now. I hung up and felt this awful crawling sensation on the back of my neck. I decided to keep the box in my garage until my friend could help. The entire time I was moving it, I felt like I was being watched. My arms were covered in goosebumps. My stomach churned. I put the box in the far corner of the garage and leaned some old furniture against it, hoping that would keep it out of sight. I tried to go about my normal routine. I watched some TV shows. I heated up leftover food. I turned on some music, but I kept the volume low. I didn't want to drown out any sounds. Part of me was paranoid that I would hear that box moving again or hear something tapping on the garage door. I went to bed around midnight. I left the hallway light on. Around 2 or 3 in the morning, I woke up with my heart pounding. I was in a cold sweat. My shirt was damp. I sat up and looked at my bedroom door. It was open, and I was sure I'd closed it before sleeping. My throat felt tight. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and stood up. The house was silent. I could hear my own breathing. I crept out into the hallway, feeling like my legs were made of lead. I walked to the garage door. It was unlocked. I opened it. The overhead light was off, but the glow from the hallway spilled into the space. The furniture I'd stacked against the box was pushed aside. The box flap was open. The painting was resting against the wall, facing me. I flinched, stepping back. My heart raced and my mouth went dry. I grabbed the painting, not caring if I damaged it. I heard the wood of the frame creak. The smile on that figure was huge, like it stretched too far across the face. The eyes looked focused on me, like they were pointing right at mine. My breathing was ragged. My shoulders were tense, and my hands felt clammy. I carried the painting into the house. not sure what else to do. I felt dizzy, like I might pass out. I leaned it against the living room wall face out. I don't know why I did that. I stood there staring at it, trembling. My arms felt weak. My skin felt cold. I couldn't think clearly. I wanted to get rid of it, but I'd tried that. I tried giving it away. I tried leaving it outside. It always came back. My head started pounding. I felt panic rising, like I couldn't catch my breath. I looked around and realized I had no clear plan. I was stuck with this painting. My mind was blank except for one thought. I couldn't just live with this thing in my house. But I was too afraid to move it again. I ended up pacing the living room until the sun came up. Every time I passed by the painting, I felt those eyes following me. When dawn arrived, I opened the windows, hoping some fresh air would clear my head. The painting didn't move. It stayed there, that grin fixed on its face. The paint looked almost wet, but it was completely dry to the touch. I didn't hear any voices, I didn't see it shift in real time, but I sensed it. I felt it every second. Now, I keep the painting in a spare room with the door locked. I shoved it inside and slammed the door. I can't bring myself to destroy it. I don't even know if that's possible. Every so often I hear a tiny creak or a faint shuffle in that room. It makes my skin crawl. My friend is supposed to come in a few days, but I don't know what he can do. I can't think about anything else. My pulse races at the slightest noise. My neck is stiff and I'm always rubbing at my arms to stop the chills. I jump when the phone rings. I jump when a car passes by. I have no idea how this will end. All I know is that every time I see that painting, the figure's smile looks wider, and I feel less and less in control of my own home. I'm terrified and I can't escape it. It's here with me, and I don't know how to make it leave. I just pray it won't keep changing. But deep down I know it will, and I don't know what that smile will look like tomorrow. I felt uneasy the moment I walked into that old beach house. The front door creaked in a way that made the hair on my arms stand up. The air smelled like salt and damp wood. My plan was simple: fix up the place, sell it, and move on. I was alone out there, and that suited me. I figured I'd work faster without distractions. The first few days went fine, and I stayed busy cleaning out broken chairs, chipped tiles, and moldy wallpaper. But on the fourth day, I discovered a hidden corner in the storage room. That's when everything started to feel strange. I was in the back of the house clearing out cobwebs. The storage room was cramped, and there was a single window with cracked glass. I moved a heavy box off a shelf and found a smaller box behind it covered in dust. The label was faded. I coughed a bit as I lifted it. It felt heavier than I expected. When I opened it, I saw an old record player and a vinyl record inside a plain sleeve. The label on the record was almost completely peeled off. I wiped it with a rag, but I couldn't read the text. It had weird marks around the center, but no clear title or band name. I set up the record player on a small table. It looked old but sturdy. The turntable turned when I plugged it in, and I felt a kind of curiosity. I hadn't listened to a vinyl record in years. I placed the record on it and carefully dropped the needle. Static filled the air, then a slow, soft melody started. It was calm at first. The notes were drawn out, and there was a slight hiss under them. I stood there, arms crossed, listening. After about a minute, I felt a tightness in my stomach. The music sounded calm, but it also made me feel trapped. My breathing got shallow and my palms got sweaty. I couldn't explain why. I stopped the record by lifting the needle. The music cut off, but I still felt that restless energy. I told myself it was just stress from all the work. I had a lot to do: floors to sand, walls to paint, plumbing to fix. I packed up the record player in the box and pushed it aside. But that night, I couldn't sleep well. I kept hearing that slow tune in my head. I rolled around in bed, my heart pounding for no reason. My bedroom was upstairs, and the waves outside usually helped me relax. But I could only focus on that lingering melody, like it was stuck in my ears. The next morning I woke up feeling tired. My shoulders hurt, and I had a headache. I went down to the kitchen and made coffee. I opened the back door to let some fresh air in. The breeze felt good and I caught the scent of the ocean. For a moment I felt calmer. But as I sipped my coffee, I heard something. It was faint, like a radio playing next door. I followed the sound. It led me to the storage room where I had left the record player. The door was closed, but I could still hear that same tune, slow and drawn out. I thought maybe I had left the player on by accident, so I opened the door. The record player was off. The vinyl was lying on the table, not spinning. The needle was lifted, yet the music was still playing. It was so soft I could barely make it out, but it was there. I stood there, feeling my chest get tight. My hands were shaking and I felt a chill on the back of my neck. Then it stopped. Complete silence except for the distant sound of the waves outside. I told myself it was just my imagination. Maybe I was overly tired. I gathered my tools and forced myself to focus on the tasks for the day. I replaced some cracked tiles in the bathroom and painted the hallway. I listened to the radio on my phone, trying to drown out any stray thoughts. The day passed without anything weird happening. By evening, I was so worn out that I went to bed early. Around 2 a.m, I woke up in a panic. My heart was beating fast and I was drenched in sweat. I thought I heard something on the floor below me. It was a few notes of that same melody, repeating over and over, faint but persistent. I held my breath, listening. My throat felt dry and my mouth tasted stale. I got out of bed and crept to the top of the stairs. My knees felt weak. I couldn't see anything in the dark. I fumbled for the light switch on the wall. Once I turned it on, the hallway looked normal. The door to the storage room was closed. I stood there, listening. No music. I told myself I had dreamed it. I managed to go back to bed, but it took me a while to calm down. The next day, I walked straight to the storage room after breakfast. I decided to get rid of that record. I thought maybe I'd break it and throw it in the trash. It creeped me out, and I didn't want it around. I found it inside the same box. It looked innocent enough, just an old piece of vinyl. But when I touched it, I felt that strange tightness in my chest again. The material of the record felt colder than it should have. I carried it to the backyard, grabbed a hammer and placed the record on a flat rock near the fence. My hands were trembling and sweat dripped down my forehead. I swung the hammer down hard. The record cracked in half. It felt good to see it broken. I picked up the pieces, wrapped them in a plastic bag and dumped them into the trash bin near the house. I tied the bag tight and slammed the lid shut. That should have been the end of it. I went back inside and worked on the living room. I replaced some old boards, hammered in new nails, and sealed gaps in the windows. I listened to music on my phone at a decent volume. I felt better knowing that record was gone. By lunchtime, I was in a decent mood. Then I stepped into the storage room to grab more paint. The record player was still on the table, but the record was there too, completely intact, resting on the turntable. No cracks, no chips. I dropped the paint can and nearly fell backward. My hands turned clammy and my ears rang. I walked closer to it, not sure what I was seeing. I touched it. It felt smooth, like it had never been broken. I leaned over, looking for any sign of damage, but it looked fine. I grabbed it off the turntable and almost threw it across the room. My heart raced, my breath came in short bursts. I wanted to check the trash outside, but I was scared of what I might find. I forced myself to go and open the trash bin. The plastic bag was there, but it was empty. No broken pieces. I felt a surge of dread in my stomach. I hurried back inside and sat down on the living room floor. I tried to calm my racing thoughts. My pulse was pounding in my ears. I told myself maybe I had lost it. Maybe I only thought I had broken it. But I remembered the hammer, the crack, and the plastic bag. I couldn't argue with that memory. That night, I couldn't relax. I kept checking every corner of the house. The wind outside sounded louder than usual and the old windows rattled. I turned on all the lights, hoping that would help me feel less nervous. Around midnight, I sat in the living room and tried watching something on my phone, but I couldn't focus. My eyes kept drifting to the hallway that led to the storage room. My breathing was shallow and my muscles felt tense. The house was silent, but I was sure I'd hear that melody any second. I finally got up and went to that storage room again. I wanted to take the entire record player and the vinyl and throw them in the ocean. I turned the doorknob. The room smelled musty and stale. The single bulb overhead gave off a weak light. The record was still on the turntable. My fingers twitched as I picked up the player. It wasn't too heavy, but the vinyl started spinning on its own the moment I touched it. I tried to lift the needle, but my hand jerked back like I got a small shock. Then the melody started again, soft and slow. I could feel the vibrations in my chest, and I felt a wave of nausea rise up. I turned off the power switch, but the turntable kept spinning. I yanked the cord out of the wall. The turntable still turned. The music still played. My throat constricted, and I tried to swallow. My mind went blank with fear. The music was calm, but it felt suffocating. My eyes stung. I dropped the record player to the floor, hoping it would break. It hit the ground, but the music kept going as if the device was still running perfectly. In a surge of panic, I grabbed the vinyl off the spinning platter. The tune stopped. Total silence. The record player lay at my feet, broken into pieces, wires exposed. I stuffed the vinyl under my arm and ran outside with it. My bare feet slapped against the cold floor, and I felt the night air sting my face. The sand was just beyond the back fence, and I headed straight for the water. The moon was out and the ocean looked dark. I ran into the surf until the water reached my thighs. My teeth chattered from the cold. I hurled the record as far as I could. It landed with a soft splash and disappeared under the waves. My heart pounded so hard I thought I might pass out. The wind gusted around me, and I shivered. I stared at the water for a moment, then turned back to the house. My clothes were soaked, and my feet felt numb. I went inside, locked the doors, and sat in the living room without turning on the lights. I tried to slow my breathing and tell myself it was over. I sat there for an hour, maybe more. Finally, I went to bed. I woke up early with a stiff neck. I felt a faint pressure in my forehead like the start of a headache. I stood up, not sure what I'd find. The house was quiet. I walked around, checking each room. Everything seemed normal, but I still felt anxious. After a while, I made some coffee and tried to eat a small breakfast, but my appetite was gone. I thought about leaving the house. Maybe I'd abandon this project and never come back. But that would mean accepting that something impossible had happened. I wasn't ready to do that. I spent the morning repairing some loose boards on the back porch. I tried to keep my mind busy. At around noon, I stepped inside to grab a drink of water. I heard a faint melody down the hall. It was the same tune, so soft I almost doubted my own ears. I followed the sound to the storage room again. The record player was lying on the floor where I had left it, broken and useless. The vinyl was back on top, unbroken. The melody played like it was coming from somewhere in the walls. My chest tightened and my palms got sweaty. I wanted to smash the entire thing again, but I realized that wouldn't help. I decided to put the record away in a heavy wooden box, lock it, and bury it somewhere in the backyard. I found an old tool chest that had a sturdy lock. I grabbed the record with trembling hands, put it inside, and snapped the lock shut. Then I walked out to the backyard with a shovel. The day was overcast and the breeze felt clammy on my skin. I picked a spot behind a small row of bushes where the ground was soft. I dug a hole about 3 feet deep. My arms ached from the effort, and sweat rolled down my back. Then I dropped the locked chest in, pushed the dirt back, and packed it down with my feet. I stood there for a while, breathing heavily, covered in dirt. I felt a bit of relief. Late afternoon, I came back inside and washed my hands. My fingers hurt from gripping the shovel. The house was silent. I checked the storage room. The broken record player was still there, but no record. I nodded to myself, hoping that was the end of it. I sat in the living room and tried to eat something simple. I managed a sandwich, but I was too nervous to enjoy it. My heart rate slowed a little as the sun went down. The house felt calmer. I turned on a small lamp and read a few pages of an old magazine I'd found. Around 10 at night, I decided to go to bed. I slept more peacefully at first, but around 3 in the morning, I jolted awake. The house was dark, but I heard it again. That slow, repetitive tune, drifting through the walls. My mouth went dry and I felt my stomach churn. I got up, grabbed a flashlight, and walked downstairs. My steps were careful. The floor creaked under me. I headed to the storage room, my heart pounding in my ears. The door was halfway open. Inside, the record player was sitting on the table, completely intact. The vinyl spun on it, and the music played at a steady volume. My hands shook so much I dropped the flashlight. My chest felt tight and I couldn't form any clear thoughts. I just stared at it. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't make a sound. The record spun slowly, the needle gliding over the surface. The music felt like it was pressing against my skull, forcing my mind to focus on it. I lunged forward and tried to yank the cord out again, but my arms felt weak. The turntable kept spinning anyway. I realized there was nothing I could do to destroy it. I had broken it, thrown it away, buried it, and it always came back. My heart hammered as I stood there in the dim light from the hallway. I started shaking, feeling sweat bead on my forehead. I walked backward out of the storage room and slammed the door shut. The music was muffled behind it, but still clear enough to notice. I leaned against the wall, gasping for air. I knew I couldn't keep living with that thing in the house. I decided I'd finish my repairs quickly and sell the place as soon as possible. I wasn't going to wait around. I didn't care if I made a profit. I just wanted out. That night, I barely slept. I heard the music until sunrise, sometimes fading in and out, sometimes louder. My nerves were shot and my body felt weak. The next day, I packed up my tools and called a realtor. I told her I wanted to list the house right away, in as-is condition, cheap. I arranged to leave at the end of the week. I stayed out of the storage room, ignoring the faint echoes of that cursed melody. I worked on the kitchen cabinets and replaced a few broken fixtures. The entire time, my ears kept picking up traces of that tune. I couldn't block it out completely, but I tried my best to pretend I didn't hear it. On my last night there, I slept in the living room with my bag packed next to me. I left the lights on. I heard the record again at around 2 in the morning, but I didn't bother to investigate. My hands trembled and I felt tears burn at the corners of my eyes. My head pounded, and I felt a dizzy sensation whenever the melody got a bit louder. I kept waiting for it to stop, but it only faded when the first light of dawn came through the windows. I left that house before noon, not looking back. My final memory as I shut the door was the faint sound of the record player from down the hall, spinning that calm, haunting melody. I felt my stomach clench as I walked to my car. I drove away, my body tense, my mind stuck on those notes. Even now, sometimes late at night, I catch myself humming part of that tune without realizing it. My hands shake when I remember how many times I tried to destroy that record. I have no explanation for what happened in that house, and I don't need one. All I know is I never want to hear that melody again. I woke up yesterday morning with a strange sense of tension in my stomach. I had no reason to feel that way. My life is quiet and isolated, and I've never had a problem with that. I live alone in a small house at the end of a dirt road, surrounded by trees and a few low hills. I don't have many visitors. I have a routine that rarely changes. I make coffee in the morning. I read old magazines on my porch. And sometimes I drive into town for supplies. Nothing dramatic ever happens here. But I noticed something off last night, and it's been bothering me ever since. I can't shake the feeling that something is wrong in my house. I'll start with what happened. It began when I was brushing my teeth before bed. I usually leave a small window open in the bathroom to let in fresh air. I always hear insects buzzing outside or the distant rustling of leaves. Last night, I heard nothing. I turned off the faucet and waited. I tried to listen more carefully. There was only silence. At first, I assumed it might be a change in the weather or a drop in temperature that kept the usual bugs quiet. I shrugged and went to bed, but I felt uneasy. My mind wouldn't let it go. I've lived here long enough to know how the nights sound. There's always some kind of noise outside. The silence was so complete that it felt unnatural. When I woke up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, I noticed the same silence. I turned on the light and looked around. Nothing was wrong with the bathroom itself. The window was open an inch or two, but I heard no wind, no leaves, no crickets. I checked the clock on the wall. I expected to hear its gentle ticking, but there was nothing. It felt like the clock had stopped, but when I looked, I saw the second hand moving. I leaned close to see if there was any sound at all. I couldn't catch even a faint tick. I touched the clock to be sure it was working. It was running fine, but the ticking sound was gone. I walked through the hallway, heading to the living room, and realized I couldn't hear my own footsteps. I felt my feet on the floor, but the usual soft thumps were missing. My heart started to race. My mouth went dry. I had an urge to say something. I wanted to test my voice, but my throat felt tight, and I was too scared to speak. I was afraid nothing would come out. I reached the living room and opened the front door. The air outside felt cold against my face. I stepped out onto the front porch. Suddenly I heard the wind in the trees. The leaves rustled. A couple of frogs croaked near the small pond behind my house. The contrast was shocking. Inside the house there had been complete silence, but outside the world sounded normal. I stood there for a few minutes, confused and tense. My hands trembled. I kept looking over my shoulder at the dark interior behind me. Eventually, I forced myself to go back inside. The moment I crossed the threshold, the silence returned. No sounds of floorboards under my feet, no quiet hum from the refrigerator, no ticking clock. My breathing sounded muted, like I was hearing it from far away. I had never felt so disoriented in my life. I wanted to lie down, but I stayed up until morning, pacing from room to room. Nothing changed. I tried to turn on the radio, but I heard no music, no static, no voice. The display lights worked, so I knew the device was on, but it produced no sound at all. At sunrise, I walked outside again. Birds were chirping in the distance. The sun felt warm and my head felt clearer. I stood there for a while, trying to decide what to do. I rubbed my arms to calm myself down. My chest felt tight, and I took a few deep breaths. I needed to see if the problem only affected the inside of the house. I stepped beyond the fence. Everything sounded normal. I heard my own footsteps on the gravel. I listened to a car passing on the main road about a mile away. It was faint, but I could hear it. Nothing seemed wrong outside the boundaries of my property. When I went back in, the silence swallowed me again. That's the best way I can describe it. It felt like something was consuming all noise. I started testing different spots in the yard, in the driveway, and near the trees. I noticed that the silence extended to my entire property, but the boundary wasn't always clear. The edge seemed to shift a few feet every time I tested it. I'd walk around and feel a bit of wind in my ears, and then I'd move a few steps, and everything would stop. The shift in sound was immediate. One moment I'd hear my shoes on the dirt, and the next moment, silence. I tried talking to myself when I stepped just outside the silent zone. My voice sounded normal. Then I'd step into the zone and my voice would vanish. I could feel the vibration in my throat, but I heard nothing. My lips moved, but there was no sound at all. That was when I felt a cold sweat trickle down my back. I remember looking around, wondering if someone was doing this on purpose. Could there be some device hidden on my property? But the place is isolated, and nobody comes here. I also realized no normal technology could strip away sound so completely. This felt impossible. I started thinking about what might be causing it. My first instinct was to check the house's power, to see if something was short-circuiting. I went to the basement and looked at the fuse box, the wires, the plumbing, and the heating system. Everything seemed normal. I didn't hear a single buzz or hum from the electrical equipment. Usually, there's at least a faint hum from the water heater or the furnace. Now I heard nothing. My heartbeat thumped hard in my chest, but even that was muffled in my ears. I pressed my hand against my chest, feeling the rapid beats. I could feel them, but I couldn't hear them. I lost my appetite around noon. I tried to make a sandwich, but the silence in the kitchen felt unsettling. The knife against the cutting board made no sound. I didn't hear the refrigerator door open or close. The overhead light was on, but I didn't hear the switch click. Every moment reminded me that something abnormal was happening. My nerves were on edge. I felt jumpy, checking over my shoulder every few minutes, expecting, I don't even know. I just felt a constant sense of dread. I decided I couldn't stay in the house. I grabbed my keys, locked the door, and drove into town. The moment I walked past my fence line, I heard the engine rumble, the tires on the gravel, and my footsteps. That brought some relief, but I still felt shaky. I went to the grocery store to pick up a few things I didn't even need just to calm myself. The automatic doors whooshed open, and I heard the faint beep from the register inside. The normal noises felt comforting, but I couldn't relax. I kept thinking about the silence at home. My skin felt clammy and my hands were unsteady. I parked outside the hardware store next and bought a handful of items that might help me investigate further. I got a small handheld recorder, a cheap microphone, and a sound level meter. I hoped these devices would confirm that I wasn't going crazy. I needed proof that something was happening. I drove back home, feeling the tightness in my chest return as soon as I saw my property. My heart pounded harder. I remember standing at the boundary, seeing the tall grass and the trees, feeling the wind on my face, and then stepping forward into total silence again. I set up the microphone right at the edge of the zone. I connected it to the recorder, pressed record, and clapped my hands while standing on the outside side. I played it back. I heard the clapping. Next, I moved inside the zone and clapped again. When I played that back, there was nothing. The recorder picked up no sound at all. I could see the microphone reacting physically to my hand movements, but the playback was empty. I spoke into it, but I heard nothing. I tried tapping the microphone. Nothing. It was like every sound disappeared the instant it was made inside the property. By then, the sun was going down. My nerves were shot. I felt anxious and unsettled. But I forced myself to check the interior of my house again. I turned on lights in every room, hoping I'd see or feel something. I found no sign of disturbance, no footprints other than mine, no damage, nothing unusual except for the absence of sound. Even the smallest actions like flipping light switches produced silence. I felt disoriented. My fingertips tingled and my chest felt tight. I had a growing fear that this silent presence was doing more than erasing sounds. I started thinking it might be affecting me physically. My hands felt colder. My mouth felt dry. I felt a pressure in my head that I couldn't explain. I tried to speak out loud, but I heard nothing, not even a faint vibration in my ears. It was eerie. My lips formed words, but my voice was gone. The silence pressed on me. I left the house and walked down the road a bit. There, I tested my voice again, and it returned. I heard myself speak. I felt so relieved. I almost laughed. But I was still terrified of what was happening inside. Was it possible that this force could eventually drain me of more than just my ability to make noise? Could it drain my emotions? Could I forget how to feel or how to speak? My throat tightened at that thought. I took deep breaths to calm down, then forced myself to go back inside. I grabbed a flashlight. I checked every corner of every room, searching for some hidden object or sign. The basement was dark, but it was just a normal basement full of old tools, boxes of junk, and a few shelves. I found no clue that would explain this phenomenon. Outside, the frogs croaked and the trees swayed. Inside, everything stayed silent. I sat on my couch, leaning forward with my elbows on my knees. I stared at the blank wall, thinking about what to do next. My heart felt slow now, maybe from exhaustion. I realized I couldn't stay in silence forever. But I also couldn't just abandon my house without trying to solve this. I decided I would stay one more night and see if anything changed in the morning. I felt certain I wouldn't be able to sleep, but I had nowhere else to go. I wasn't ready to check into a motel or anything like that. I tried to eat a simple dinner, but I couldn't enjoy it. Chewing made no sound, and it made me feel uneasy. I left most of my food on the plate. After that, I gathered the hardware store items and set them on the coffee table. I sat there with the flashlight in my hand, flicking it on and off, testing if the switch might produce any sound. It didn't. Around midnight, I felt my eyelids droop. I'm not sure how I managed to fall asleep, but I did. When I woke up this morning, I felt stiff and sore. My neck ached. I looked at my phone to check the time, and I saw a bunch of missed texts from a friend. I realized I hadn't told anyone what was going on. I didn't want people to think I'd lost my mind, but I felt the urge to tell someone anyway. I left the house and drove halfway down the dirt road until I could hear the car's engine again. Then I called my friend, told him I was dealing with something at home, but I didn't go into detail. He asked if I was okay. I said I was fine, just stressed. I might have sounded nervous though, because he asked if I wanted him to visit. I told him I'd let him know. Now I'm sitting at my desk writing down every detail while I'm standing outside the silent zone near the boundary. I keep looking at the house, trying to make sense of this situation. My plan is to gather more recording devices, maybe even set up cameras. I want to see if I can capture any sign of what's causing this. Part of me feels tempted to run, to leave this property and never come back, but that doesn't solve anything. It's still my home. I can't lie. I feel afraid. My hands are shaking as I type. My stomach feels tight. There's a slight ringing in my ears, but I'm not sure if it's real or if my nerves are messing with me. I'm worried that this thing might be getting stronger, expanding beyond the property. Right now it seems contained, but I'm not sure how long it will stay that way. I'm also worried it could do more than erase sound. My mind keeps jumping to worst-case scenarios, but I don't want to speculate too much. I need facts. Tonight, I'll place the recorder at different spots in the house, then check it later outside the zone. I'll see if there's any faint noise or static that might give me a clue. If that fails, I might invite my friend over, though I'm not sure what that would accomplish. I just know I can't face this alone for much longer. The silence is messing with my head. My body feels tense all the time, and my heartbeat feels irregular when I'm inside. Each second without sound makes me feel more isolated. I keep reminding myself that I'm alive, and that I can still hear when I step away. But that doesn't erase my fear that this thing is feeding on more than just noise. I'm writing all this down to stay focused on practical steps. I want to remember the details in case I need to show someone else what's happening. I don't know if anyone will believe me, but I have to try. My house has always been my safe place, but right now it feels like a trap. I'm going back inside after I finish this. I want to see if anything has changed since this morning. Maybe the silence has lifted, but I doubt it. I feel that same pit in my stomach. I feel that same sweat on my palms. I don't know how this will end. I don't see a simple fix, but I refuse to just walk away. I'll keep testing. I'll keep searching for a clue. I need to know what's absorbing every sound in my house and why. I need to know if it's going to steal my voice permanently. I need to know if I can still feel emotions tomorrow, or if this force will strip that from me too. For now, I'm clinging to the fact that I can still hear my own voice when I stand by the road. That's enough to give me hope, even if I'm terrified. I'm about to head back in. I'll keep documenting everything, step by step. That's all I can do. I won't let this silence swallow me. I never thought I'd lose my peace of mind over a few scratches on a wall, but that's exactly what happened. About 2 weeks ago, I decided to rearrange my bedroom furniture. It wasn't anything fancy, just moving the bed to a different corner and swapping out the nightstands. When I pulled the bed away from the wall, I noticed deep scratches along the paint. At first, I thought I had scraped the surface myself while moving the headboard. But I kept looking, and I realized these marks weren't fresh. Some looked older, like they had been there for a while. There were also scrapes on the headboard itself, like something sharp had raked across it. I'm not a superstitious guy. I usually blame stuff on normal wear and tear. But I looked closer and saw these were more like claw marks than anything else. They were too precise and too deliberate in their pattern, as if someone had gripped the wall and the bed during a bad dream. I felt a twist in my stomach. My first thought was maybe a pet had gotten trapped there somehow, but I don't own any animals, and the angles didn't match what a cat or dog might do. I shrugged it off at that moment, thinking I might have lost track of something that happened a long time ago. I patched the scratches on the wall with some putty and paint, hoping I could forget about it. The next night I was lying in bed, playing around on my phone. The fresh paint on the wall smelled faintly of chemicals. I tried not to dwell on the strange marks. Then I heard a scraping sound coming from behind the wall. It was faint, almost like nails tapping. I froze. I turned off my phone screen and listened. The sound stopped. I got up, pressed my ear to the wall, and waited. Nothing. I told myself it must have been a settling noise in the house, or maybe a pipe. My chest felt tight, though, and it took me a while to fall asleep. By the third night, I realized I was sleeping poorly. Every time I moved in bed, I remembered those scratches and that faint scraping sound. I kept imagining something reaching through the wall. It doesn't make sense, but I couldn't shake the idea. My thoughts kept jumping to the possibility that someone had been in my room or something had been messing with my bed. I also noticed a sore spot on my arm. It looked like a faint scratch, but I didn't recall bumping into anything. I tried to dismiss it and told myself I probably scraped against the nightstand. Things got worse when I started checking the area around the headboard more carefully. I found more scratches that I hadn't noticed before. They were behind the new lamps and along the wooden boards near the floor. This time they seemed fresher. The paint flaked at the edges. There was a slight discoloration on the wood, like it had been worn away. I felt a rush of adrenaline. My heart pounded in my ears. I stepped back, looked around, and realized I had no explanation for it. I decided to set up a small camera in my room. I'm not a tech expert, but I've got a couple of indoor security cams. They're easy to hide on a shelf or in a corner. I placed one in a way that would capture the bed and the wall behind it. I just wanted some peace of mind. If I could see what happened at night, I'd probably catch myself fidgeting in my sleep. That would explain everything. I wanted to blame my own restless behavior. On the first night of recording, I slept fitfully. I kept imagining the camera's tiny green light. I was convinced I'd wake up and find footage of me thrashing around. The next morning, I grabbed my laptop and checked the file. Most of it was me turning over, adjusting the sheets, or scratching my shoulder. Around 2:15 a.m., though, there was a brief flicker in the video. The frame distorted, and for a split second, there was a crackling static sound. It almost resembled a muffled scream. My stomach dropped, but the distortion only lasted a second or two. Then everything looked normal again. I watched that part a few more times. I couldn't see anything in the room, but the audio spike made me uncomfortable. It didn't sound like random static. It had a tone that reminded me of someone yelling underwater. I tried to tell myself it was a glitch in the camera, maybe interference from a neighbor's Wi-Fi. But every time I replayed it, I got the same chills. That night, I set up 2 cameras, one on each side of the bed, just to be sure. I also tried to stay awake longer, hoping I could catch any strange activity in real time. I dozed off around midnight. The next morning, I checked the footage again. Both cameras had the same brief distortion, but this time, it lasted almost 5 seconds. The static sound was louder, and I thought I heard what might be a drawn-out moan or cry. My hands trembled on the keyboard. Something about the noise made my scalp prickle. I kept pausing and rewinding, but I couldn't see any shape or movement. Just me asleep, and then the image rippling like a bad TV signal. I felt a small knot of panic. I started wondering if my house was haunted, or if there was something in the walls. I don't like to jump to supernatural explanations, so I considered electrical problems or faulty wiring in my camera setup. Still, the scratches on the wall and the headboard told me there was something physical going on. The next few nights, the distortions on the recordings grew longer, sometimes lasting up to 10 or 15 seconds. The noises also got worse. They sounded like ragged breathing or distant cries. At times I thought I could make out faint words, but everything was garbled. After a week of these nightly recordings, I realized I felt uneasy in my own room. During the day, I tried not to think about it. I'd force myself to do normal stuff, work on my computer, watch TV in the living room, cook, clean, anything to keep my mind off the bedroom. But as soon as night came, I felt on edge. My heartbeat would quicken whenever I walked down the hallway. Even simple tasks like changing into pajamas felt tense. I could feel the cameras pointing at the bed, and I dreaded checking the files in the morning. I didn't know what I'd see or hear next. One night I woke up around 3 a.m. The room felt cold, even though the thermostat was set to my usual temperature. I lay on my back, blinking in the dark. The curtains fluttered slightly like there was a draft. I sat up, trying to see if the window was open. It wasn't. Then I felt the mattress shift near my feet, as if someone sat down there. The pressure dipped. I froze. I couldn't see anything. The moonlight barely lit the edges of the room, but I felt the weight on the bed. I stayed still, my pulse pounding in my neck. Then it released like whoever or whatever had settled there stood up again. I reached over and turned on the lamp. Nobody was there. The door was closed, and I was alone. My mouth felt dry. I got up, drank some water, and tried to calm down. The next morning, I rushed to check the camera footage. Around 3 a.m., there was another huge wave of distortion that lasted almost a minute. The audio was full of crackling, and I heard what sounded like raspy breathing. At one point, I saw my sleeping form shift. The sheets bunched near my feet. Then the image blurred again, so I couldn't see the exact cause. After it cleared, I was still in bed, alone. But I recognized the moment I must have sat up because the blanket slid off my legs. I played it back twice more and finally shut my laptop. I felt sick. Something was there and I couldn't see it. I tried to keep calm by telling myself there must be a logical explanation, but I had no clue what it could be. I started using more cameras. I put one in each corner of the room, plus a small audio recorder near the headboard. I tested them during the day, making sure they worked fine. Everything seemed okay. That night I lay down, trying not to panic. My heart thumped every time the house settled or the floor creaked. After a couple of hours, I must have fallen asleep. Then I woke up again, early in the morning, feeling that same dip in the mattress. It happened near my legs this time. I lifted my head and stared. It was pitch black. I reached out, feeling the bed, expecting to touch a body. There was nothing, but the space where I put my hand felt cold. I rubbed my face and sat up. I turned on the light. The room looked normal. I didn't see any indent on the mattress or any sign of movement. When I checked the cameras that morning, I saw the same pattern of distortions. Now they spanned almost 2 minutes total. The audio was full of weird hissing sounds like an old radio struggling to find a station. I heard what might have been faint gasps or sobbing. I also noticed a faint shadow flicker across the wall, but the image was too warped to be sure. My blood felt like ice water in my veins. I tried to calm myself with coffee, but my hands trembled, and I spilled it on the kitchen table. I wiped it up with a shaky grip. I started feeling jumpy in every room of the house, not just the bedroom. Small noises made me flinch. My appetite fell off. I barely slept. My eyelids felt heavy during the day, and I had trouble focusing on work. I kept thinking about the nighttime distortions. I avoided telling friends because I didn't want them to think I was losing my mind. But I considered calling someone to check the wiring or the house's foundation. Still, those scratches told me it wasn't just a structural issue. Something had left physical marks. One night I decided to sit up and wait, determined to see if I could catch anything in the act. I put on some comfortable clothes, set up the cameras, and got under the covers with the lights off. I set my phone alarm to vibrate every hour, just to keep me from drifting into a deep sleep. By 2 a.m., my nerves were frayed. I sat there in the dark, blinking at the ceiling, my body tense. Nothing happened. At 3 a.m., I felt a wave of fatigue. I started nodding off. Then I heard a soft creak by the door. My eyes snapped open. I stared, waiting. The door didn't move. Then I heard a thump near the headboard, almost like a fist knocking lightly on wood. My scalp tingled. I forced myself to lean forward, reaching out to flick on the lamp. The instant my hand touched the switch, the mattress sunk near my hip. I jerked sideways, my breath catching. The lamp came on, and I saw the depression in the sheets. It was right next to me, as if someone was crouched there. I couldn't see anyone, but the covers looked pressed down. Then it sprang back up and the sheets fluffed back into place. I could feel my own heartbeat in my throat. I jumped out of bed, turned on every light, and paced around the room. The cameras were still rolling, but I was too scared to do anything else. My mind raced with questions. Was I hallucinating? Was something messing with me? I sat in a chair by the dresser, refusing to turn the lights off again until morning. Around 6 a.m., the sky started brightening. I finally mustered the courage to turn off the cameras and load the files onto my laptop. The footage showed me sitting up, looking alert. The audio recorded a low hum, followed by the thump near the headboard. Then, when the mattress sank, the video warped heavily. I watched my reaction, but the distortion covered up any detail of what caused that depression. I shut my laptop and sighed. My arms felt weak. Over the next few days, I tried to ignore my bedroom as much as possible. I avoided sleeping there until I had no choice. I set up the cameras every single night, but I couldn't bring myself to watch all the footage in the morning. Sometimes I just let the files sit there on the memory card. I felt paranoid. I started imagining movements in my peripheral vision. My neck muscles stayed tight all day. I got headaches from stress. Eventually, I forced myself to check a week's worth of videos in one go. The distortions kept happening. They got longer, the audio got weirder, and sometimes I caught glimpses of dark shapes near the bed. They never formed a clear outline. They appeared as flickers, like shadows that didn't match my body or the furniture. Each time I saw it, I felt my hands shake. I paused, took deep breaths, and kept going. I saw the sheets move on their own a few times. I watched them shift as if someone was crawling across the bed. My heart pounded so hard I felt lightheaded. It's been 2 weeks now since I first saw those scratches. I still haven't found a solid explanation. I haven't told anyone. Every night, I feel this tension in my stomach. And every morning, I feel dread about reviewing the footage. The presence in my room isn't going away. I still wake up to cold spots and that feeling of weight pressing down near my legs or my hip. Sometimes I think I hear faint breathing in my ear. My bedroom is a place I avoid, but I can't avoid it forever. I can't keep sleeping on the couch in the living room. I'm exhausted and I don't know if this is all in my head or if something is truly there. The marks on the wall haven't come back since I patched them, but I haven't looked too closely. A couple of times I thought I saw fresh scratches on the headboard, but I tried not to stare. It feels like every time I pay attention to it, the activity gets worse. When I walk in, the air feels heavier. My eyes water sometimes and my ears pop like there's a pressure change. There's a tightness in my chest that won't go away. My hands are always sweating. The cameras keep capturing that growing static, those distorted frames, and those faint, garbled cries that make my skin crawl. I can't say I've learned anything profound from this. I just know my bedroom isn't the same place it used to be. If I had somewhere else to go, I'd probably leave for a while. But I don't have that option. So every night I power up the cameras, turn off the lights, and wait. I lie there, trying not to think about that weight settling at the foot of my bed. It happens almost every night now, sometimes twice. It's a slow pressure, like a person lowering themselves carefully. I feel my muscles tighten. I clench my fists under the covers. My breathing gets shallow, and my chest aches. I don't move until it goes away. I'm still hoping I'll wake up one day and find out there's a rational cause. Maybe I'll discover a stray piece of hardware in the walls that's messing with the cameras. Or maybe I'll see that I've been scratching the bed in my sleep. But those ideas feel less likely with every passing night. I can't explain the invisible pressure on the mattress. I can't explain the distortions that happen simultaneously on multiple cameras. And I sure can't explain the strange audio that resembles cries or screams. I'm telling this story because I don't know what else to do. I have a normal job, normal routines, and no history of any weird experiences. I just swapped my furniture around and found something that feels impossible to ignore. Maybe one day I'll gather the courage to post the footage online or bring in an expert. But for now, I'm just trying to survive each night without panicking. I check the wall and the headboard almost every morning. The scratches seem the same. Occasionally I run my fingers over them, feeling the grooves. They're real, and they have an unsettling pattern, like nails dug in repeatedly. Whenever I see that pattern, I feel a flutter